Good evening. Welcome to the RSU 5 Board of Directors meeting. Tonight is Wednesday, November 29th, 2017. We are in the Durham Community School cafeteria. Lindsay, I believe, will be joining us shortly. Jen is out of town and Sarah isn't feeling well. So hopefully one more joining us, but we'll get started in the meantime, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, consideration and approval of the minutes. Oh, that's loud, sorry. So we're looking for a motion for the minutes of October 25th, 2017 and November 8th, 2017 as presented, barring any errors or omissions. Naomi, second. Vali, discussion? You have a discussion? You just ready to vote? Okay. All those in favor? None opposed, thank you. Adjustments to the agenda. We will be adding an item 14, excuse me, we'll be adding an executive session at the end of today's, what's on our regularly scheduled agenda. 6, good news and recognition, report from the board student rep.
And one other adjustment. I would like to...
Oh, right, sorry, we're moving
things
around.
I'd like to move the discussion of policy KF, community youth, right after A1, the district happening.
Okay. Okay.
And we had a wonderful recognition ceremony last Tuesday. Regrettably, I wasn't able to go because I was sick, but I heard that it was really well received, and there was performances by the chamber choir and different recognitions for academic awards around the school. For athletics, our fall sports season just came to an end, and our winter sports, like indoor track and basketball, just commenced, and those are going really well right now. For performing arts, our fall musical just came to an end, and that was a wild success. And our 1X are just about to start next week. And big news from the community is FHS just won the School Spirit Challenge, raising almost 40,000 pounds of food for the Good Shepherd Food Bank on Channel 13.
All right, thank you. That is great news. Let's see. So 6B, good news from Durham Community School. Mr. Pitton.
Okay. I was expecting, usually we had the big speakers up, and it just struck me that they weren't there today. So thank you. So in a similar vein to Carter's report, we equally had food pass here. We didn't quite come to that total, but we still had a significant amount of pasta and sauce as part of the annual pasta drive that the student council organized, and that was just prior to Thanksgiving, donating over 630 items of pasta and sauce to a local food pantry. The focus of school culture work this fall has been really around kindness, and been a number of different initiatives in that category that under the sort of leadership of Mr. Sibley. Included Peaceful Bus work. We actually started the school year with Peaceful Bus, for those who don't know, is we have regular meetings by buses. So pre-K-8 groups who travel together on the bus, we meet as buses. And then the older children play a leadership role with the younger children, and all staff are sort of also assigned to different buses as part of working on building the culture for the bus ride in and the bus ride home, obviously. So that Peaceful Bus we've been doing for several years. We'd started the year with Peaceful Bus picnic actually outside, again, where the children would do activities by their bus groups. And that had continued on into the fall, and our most recent Peaceful Bus meeting a couple of weeks ago carried on from the school theme on kindness, and the children have made kindness quilts, which are really paper products, but they're actually outside here. You maybe see them as you leave. But also within that realm, they had mix-it-up lunches where children would be encouraged to sit with other children, different conversation starters for lunches, focusing on those sort of stressful parts of the day for children, whether it be bus rides, recess, lunchtime, ways in which children are being specifically focusing on kindness to others and what strategies they can use. So there's been a number of activities throughout this fall, which was a nice way to sort of culminate some of that initial work with then the food pass. And that work continues on through the year. So the next Peaceful Bus, I think, we're looking at is in either a couple of weeks or perhaps after the break. We're sort of looking at that timing for that. So that's just some updates from Durham.
No bugs or germs or anything?
No, that's
Just
more
kindness?
good news. Yeah, that's right.
All right, I like kindness.
The good news is lack of news on those, actually.
Perfect.
I will say that process that we'd come to, Jason and his team did an amazing job, very smoothly, took care of things, labeled. Weather was very cooperative, managed to spray, rain the next day, so we've got that done, which was great.
Great.
So thank you.
Okay, 7, public comment. We have a few members of the public if they'd like to. They're all nodding no at me. Okay. Superintendent's report.
So first, I'd like to report about the new track and field. It is nearing completion. Every day we get a little closer. Their plan is that it will still be finished by the end of the week. Tomorrow there will be a walkthrough to figure out what items remain on the punch list to be finished. The track and field will be ready for use by our athletes in the spring. The final coat to the track will be installed after school's out in June, but it can be utilized by our athletes in its current condition in the spring. Nike is waiting until the spring to install the art project on the back of the school that says Falcon Pride. Fundraising is continuing as there are items that we still do not have, such as the bleachers, garage to store the equipment, and a sound system. And as you know, you approved our next priorities to be the dugouts and the bleachers. And the most current plan continues to be to have our maintenance crew build the dugouts over the winter when the fields are not needing maintenance, and have the dugouts ready to go in the spring when the girls begin playing. The Tri-Town group continues to fundraise, so funds available is an ever-changing number, and we're really thankful to the groups that continue to contribute in the fundraising effort. Yesterday, the power was checked, and all of the lights are working appropriately on the field. And we have also notified RAD that we're seeking damages for the delays beyond October the 18th. And RAD's current focus is to get everything wrapped up and then to meet to discuss the letter that I sent to them a couple of weeks ago, and I'm agreeable to this next step. I also wanted to mention that I recently attended the high school production of 9 to 5 and was so proud of all of our students. We have many talented thespians, including our 2 student board reps, Carter and Ben, that starred in the show. This has sparked some discussion about whether high school students should tackle such tough topics as sexual harassment through theater. RSU 5 has never shied away from current and sensitive topics and prides itself in its strong performing arts program. Last year in Letters from the Sea, for those who went, you remember that we had drunken sailors in that play. A couple of years ago, our students performed Chicago, the content of that being corruption in the criminal justice system. I have reviewed our policies and see nowhere that any board policies have been broken. I'm not sure there could have been a more timely play chosen with all of the recent allegations of sexual harassment in the workplace, with Matt Lauer being our most recent one fired from such allegations. Natalie Safley, our new drama teacher, modified some of the content of the original play to ensure it was appropriate for high school students. Our students were very proud of their performance. There was a director's note in the program distributed 2 people before the show began, telling them that it was about harassment and women in the workplace. Additionally, on the program, it had a rating of PG-13 on the program cover. Going forward, I've spoken to Jen, and we're happy to include maybe a synopsis in the posters that advertise the play, as well as whatever we feel like the rating is, so that families can choose whether to attend and whether they feel like it's appropriate for their children or not. So again, I want to congratulate our students for a job well done on that play. Next, I'd like to report that the building project at the high school should be completed at the end of the December break. Michelle Richardson, John Semino, Dennis Willett, Michelle Lichtai, and I met with the architect, PDT, and the construction company Sheridan yesterday to discuss our remaining items and who owes what to whom. We were able to agree on all areas except for 3 that are kind of outstanding. The concrete plaza by the cafeteria, Sheridan plans on discussing this with Crooker and to get back with a proposal for us to consider. All agree that the work as is not acceptable. The ledge that we had to remove, we're still figuring out what is owed there. We have agreed on the quantities of ledge removed, so now it's really just a matter of going back into the documents and figuring out the math. And then the last area is just allowances that were included in the project, such as funds for slab trenching or plaster ceiling removal. A lot of those we did not use, and we just have to agree on what's left in those areas. We felt like the meeting went really well, and we feel really very good about the overall project and feel like we'll be able to come to an agreement in the very near future on this. I'm also very sad to report that Diane Whitmore, high school Latin and French teacher, has given me a letter reporting her retirement, effective at the end of this school year. Diane has been a beloved teacher of our students for 17 years, and she has assured us that she is going to remain a part of our RSU 5 community, but just in a different way. And we wish her well in her retirement, and she will be very sorely missed. And finally, I'm reporting to the board that Kirsten Trefsker, high school English teacher, has resigned effective December the 6th. And that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you. So administrator reports, we're going to start with finance. Michelle? Oh, no?
No,
Sorry,
no, this is the adjustment.
Oh, we're moving it up here?
Yeah. Right there.
Okay.
We had a request to move that up earlier because I had asked David Watts to come on up, and you might as well join me now. So in your packet, we're just doing this one, the first read only at this point for the adjustment. The rest of them for second read will be later. So we have the original policy is all struck out because there was so much that needed to be changed, and there was a lot of work. I feel like this is so low. There was a lot of work done at the administrative level. We had I think at least 2 administrative meetings where we had discussion at great length over this policy. It was at an A-team meeting, so it involved all the administrators and directors. And so I think that we feel that this is really acceptable to everybody, and we are going to entertain questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Dave since he really has the responsibility of this, in enforcing the policy. How's that?
Sure. Enforcing it. That's a good.
So maybe we'll just ask you if you have any questions. I don't want to make questions if there aren't any, but if there are any questions that you have about why the changes are, if there's anything in particular.
Lindsay?
Sorry if this is in here, but I wasn't seeing it. What is the fee structure?
I have a handout for you that I'll give you right now.
Okay.
So the fee structure
Let's
is
pay
not
to that.
part of the policy, and so this is like an administrative type of procedure type. So we can talk about how we came to these fees, and Dave is the one that was gathering this information about how, so he can answer any questions about that. So I'll hand that out, and then if you have questions.
Yeah, the fee structure itself has not, for the facilities, has not changed at all. It's just been put, hopefully, in a way that makes it more clear. But the rates have not changed for a long time. Basically, they're just put in a different format. The rates for fields have actually gone down because we used to charge on an hourly basis, and we've changed it to league play, which is comparable to what we pay ourselves, what the RSU pays for the use of the Hunter Road fields, and it's also in line with the rate structure in neighboring Yarmouth. So felt that it was more consistent to do it as in a league format as opposed to an hourly rate.
Is the list of people who can use it, is that in sort of any sort of rank order, like priority order, that the RSU gets first priority, or is it?
Yes and no. We decided to go away from ranking, and with the understanding that it's really generated through, who gets use of the properties is really generated through central office. So it's the buildings, have their curricular uses and obviously control everything there. After that, it's, and we do it based on the calendar. So we don't release anything until after the calendar summit, essentially, which occurs in May and June. So
Did you
once
say the
everything
calendar
is
summit? There's a summit around.
well, that's what we used to call it. It was actually called the Calendar Summit. So I'm still in the old terminology here, but yes. And so once the buildings submit all of their dates for the year, that's when we open it up. So.
David, is there any, it's not listed here as the groups that are entitled to use the facilities, but what are private local citizens? Say we had a neighbor who once had a celebration of life there. I don't know if when Beth Wilhoit, that was an arrangement as through a private local citizen, but there's nothing here saying that local individuals can rent the space.
We've never had it in the policy. And so it's never been the kind of thing where we make it available for private individual use. Beth's was because she was part of the RSU. I think again, what it does allow us to make those decisions is that it's not specifically allowed, it's not specifically disallowed. It means that if somebody wants to apply for something special like a memorial service or something like that, then it's just a matter of coming through us. I speak with the superintendent and we make that decision of whether or not it can happen, and then really it's all up to does it interfere with the school? That's really what it amounts to. So, yeah. Yeah, Lindsay?
I guess I'm having a hard time imagining, why not just list it? If we're going to go through the trouble of listing explicitly all these other types of groups, what's the harm in an individual? Maybe I'm not seeing something.
Well, the difficulty with an individual is all these other groups you're required to provide commercial liability insurance.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So from an individual standpoint, nobody's really carrying that. So then it becomes a question of whether or not we're sponsoring it, whether or not we support it. So there are a lot of specific questions depending on a specific use like that, and those things are more individual. So.
I may just be missing it, but it says to refer to the guidelines for the track and field. Is that a whole separate entity?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Has its own book of rules.
Yeah.
Great. And
As does the Performing Arts Center.
is that something we'll be looking at some point, or?
The guidelines came to the board earlier, and they're on the website in 2 places.
Yeah.
Good to know, thanks.
The specifically around the track and field ones, those were, we'll call them negotiated with the town.
Yeah.
Jeremy.
It's got a couple minor details like I usually dig out. On section I, letter F, it talks about groups being town-based, but everything else is sort of RSU member-based. So I don't know if town was right. It's on page 1 of 5, section F.
Are we talking about the, wait a minute, section I?
So section F, RSU number 5 based nonprofit organizations, such groups are
one.
considered
Okay, I was
town-based.
Yes.
So I didn't know, because town isn't really defined in here, so I didn't know if that should have been more, region-based or whatever. Wasn't quite sure. I understood the intent, but I wasn't sure if.
I think it should be
Town wasn't-
district-based.
Yeah, district, yeah.
Just change town to district. Because it's 3 towns. So, or make towns plural. But that's weird. Too weird grammatically. Towns placed.
Yeah, we can change that.
Or towns based.
Change that to district.
Such groups are considered
Yep.
district-based if greater than 70.
Yeah, that can be easily changed.
I mean, the rest of it is right. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
oh,
members,
absolutely.
residents of the
Yep.
RSU, but.
Town-based.
Another minor little one like that, the second paragraph, the superintendent is responsible to develop administrative regulations. How about the superintendent is responsible for developing administrative regulations?
So I felt like in the past, there was some sort of rule around you had to have a custodian for any rental of the space. I don't know if that was a misunderstanding of the
There's-
policy before, or if that's still in there.
Still.
It's not, there's, the policy calls for a staff member to be present at all times. We're not to be handing out keys all over the place. And the building admins wanted to be able to make the determination, for instance, if there is a PTSO that wants to use the facility, that they are not necessarily charged separately for their for the custodial use, for them to be there. So it's been rewritten in section 4J. So you see under staff member present. Unless approved in advance by the building administrator, a staff member must be present during the entire time the facilities are in use. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a custodian. If there is a group that has a staff member on it, perhaps one of the boosters organizations or a PTSO or something like that, and they have, one of the teachers happens to live in town, and they've agreed to volunteer to come in and be the person in charge of the key. They can do that. The other decision then is custodial service. It's primarily the custodian was there for the entire time, and this is what most schools do. We want everybody to be able to access the buildings, but we also, whenever possible, to try to schedule their meetings and things like that during the time when the custodians are here. Then nobody has to do anything. You don't have to pay anything extra. But if it's on a weekend, and you need a custodian to come in and open the building, they also don't necessarily have to clean the building for 8 hours. They have to come in, they have to help set up, they have to get the equipment, they have to be there for those 2 or 3 hours in the beginning, and they have to clean up after the 100 or so people have left and get the building ready for Monday morning. And there's room, that's the policy is, if we don't have a staff member there, then yes, we have to have a custodian there the whole time. There has to be a staff member in the building. It's just, for safety reasons, if something spills, somebody needs to be able to get into a building to clean it, or into the room to clean it up, has to be able to access it. Likewise, though, if a building administrator says, we don't want to pay for the overtime for a custodian to come in on the weekend, and it's a PTSO, we'll just deal with it. We'll open our, we'll deal with a little bit of a messy building on Monday morning, and it's okay. They can make that decision. The building admins can make that decision.
Kate.
I am looking at this from a lens where, say you needed to reserve the facility for a public hearing, and you're not an RSU 5 community member. It's a public hearing through like a state agency, but it's for a permit related to a private entity that's seeking a permit. So it's a public hearing, but it's for a private entity. And I don't see how that fits into this policy. So like, is there a what would the fee be for use of the facility if you needed to have a public hearing?
A public hearing, and who's sponsoring the public hearing? Who's holding it?
It's, I guess, held by...
Wouldn't the municipality be holding it?
No. Like, say it's a state permit, because I have to do this often.
So like a DEP permit or something?
Yes, like a DEP permit that is for a facility in a town. You need to have the hearing in the town in a space that can accommodate enough people, and the school is usually
So wouldn't that be a non-RSU 5-based nonprofit group?
Correct.
Because that's government would be nonprofit.
Be a government or
So
a
is it a
nonprofit.
youth group or an adult group?
Well, if it's the DEP, I'd say it's an adult group.
Yeah, right.
Maybe, I don't know.
Sometimes it may seem like it's run by a youth group, but hey,
Okay, I just think of all right. And is there provision in here for like crowd control and things like that if you're having an event?
Those are town issues. I do know that in Freeport, if it's over 100 people, you are required to hire police and so those are all individual town issues. Those are not school-based issues.
Given the lack of a police force in Durham and Pownell, I don't know if we have those same rules.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know I'm not exactly familiar with what the policies are in Durham, and right. I mean, who would you hire at the? I don't even know where we go at this point.
I think like it would be maybe a county sheriff.
The county sheriff.
Yeah,
Okay.
But in Pownell at least.
Okay. Yep.
Private security.
In the last 15 years, we haven't hosted an event that required it.
And we've certainly had more than 100 people for events.
Yeah. So I mean, I could look into Durham's policy, the town of Durham's policy, to find out, but.
I think the chair of the select board's writing it down right now, so I think he's going to find out for us.
Oh. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Lindsay. Yeah.
What does this mean? The superintendent is responsible, if we change it, for developing administrative regulations. Isn't that already laid out in this policy? Like,
No,
what
this
are
is-
we saying the
this is-
superintendent is responsible for
There
beyond
are
what's
two different,
here?
there are two different things. There's the administrative procedure, which is the application itself and the fees. And those are the additional things. Did they get the, but did they get the application as well? No. Okay. So the application is on the website, and we've, we've updated that as well. But that's an administrative procedure. It's not a policy, so it doesn't, it's not required to, we tweak things constantly. It's like, okay, now this wording doesn't quite work right, so.
Oh.
So it's sort of like, this is the policy, and then how they
Correct.
implement it, they'll sometimes have these regulations
Right.
or procedures. Those two words are interchangeable?
What's that, policy and procedure?
No.
Oh,
Regulations.
yes,
And,
yes,
because this is
exactly.
administrative regulations, not procedures, so
Okay.
as long as they
we
both
can
mean the same thing.
Why don't we change that then? Just I mean, it's not a defined term anywhere. It's not capitalized. It really isn't something, but I know that in our circle, we do tend to refer to it as administrative procedures. So we can change that just so, in the future when, we're not all sitting here. Yeah.
Valerie?
4, use of facilities for all groups, and it goes A through, I don't know how many letters, it just keeps going forever, but you have B, no alcohol, C, no tobacco, D, illegal uses. Do we need to specify as a standalone point, no drugs? Because in other policies, we do have no alcohol, no tobacco, no drugs, and we even specify which drugs are not allowed.
We could, and what we may want to do, I know that policy has been updated recently too. Yeah, I started working on this 2 years ago. That's how long it's taken to get to this point. So a lot has changed since I started. But maybe we ought to just reference the school policy at that point too.
So are you suggesting that on C, we might say no tobacco or drugs?
You can do
Or
that,
I-
or you can just add another letter for no drugs and describe the drugs that are not allowed.
And
Because
what's
medicine, approved medicines are drugs, they would be allowed, I assume. But, if someone wants to use some other
Well,
illegal drug, that's not medicine.
Right. I think illegal drugs it would be implied, I hope, under no illegal uses. However,
Yeah, but marijuana is
now
not
we have-
illegal.
Exactly.
Well, correct, except each town is developing its own, and I'm not sure where that stands in any of the towns right now.
But I think we can set our own rules
We
that, even if the
can.
town says you can,
That's correct. So I think that might be the only one that we have to consider outside of the illegal uses statement. So that's what I'm thinking.
Towns can't regulate the personal use aspect of the marijuana law. They're only going to be able to regulate retail. So personal use is a state thing.
But personal use, you can use it anywhere? I thought there were only certain places
No,
where
not
you could.
necessarily.
Right.
Not in public.
I think that's what Val is saying.
Exactly.
You might want to call that out in policy.
Okay.
That
Right.
even though it's legal for personal use, we don't want it on school grounds.
People are
Right,
not
which
supposed
also,
to drink
yeah.
alcohol
And I
in
think
public
it-
space.
Right, and it
Right.
So
used
it's the
to
same.
be.
right, so the same way we say no alcohol and no cigarettes,
Exactly.
we say no
No,
marijuana.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to specify no
Yep.
marijuana?
Yep. And then I had, where it says the use of electrical equipment in G,
Yes.
you're making a provision for someone from the school personnel shall supervise or control all electrical arrangements and use of equipment. And then in the use of technology, you do not allow for the supervision for someone from school personnel to supervise, and that, should we not have that for
No, this
technology
is
as well?
No, and this, it's strictly, basically what we do with the technology is to, we have to consult with That's the first part. And from there, it's determined where. So it doesn't matter, we don't want to just, we're not going to say that somebody has to be supervised if we don't think they need to be.
So what's
But
electrical
why-
electrical then?
Yeah, electrical equipment, you
Like plugs?
require
Electrical
supervision.
equipment is, it could be specialized lighting, it could be, yeah, I mean, most of the times I'm thinking about lighting and things like that.
Yeah, but if
Um,
you're up in the booth at
Yep.
the high school, you have the lights, so that would be electrical equipment. But then you have the computers to run the lights. That would be technology, or
No,
not?
again, FPAC, totally by itself,
Has its own set of rules.
totally by itself.
Okay, so
That equipment is all separate, there's nothing else like it.
okay.
so.
So I'm still not quite understanding why electric equipment needs school personnel supervising, and technology does not.
Because I'm looking at
you
that
can
like if
kill
somebody
yourself
plugs
with
in a crock
electrical
pot.
technology.
I'm sorry, I
You
didn't
can
hear
kill yourself with electrical technology,
Okay.
whereas, you know, you know, plugging in or using a projector that's already hardwired into something, you're not probably going to, you know, electrocute yourself, but you could, you know, you could end up destroying the equipment. But so then that's why it's more a matter of, you know, do we even allow the use? And a lot of times we just say, you know, you've got to bring in your own computers, you've got to bring in your own equipment. We've done that too, so.
So the electrical one is more of a liability? It just seems strange, like use of electric. So Saturday, there's going to be a craft fair here, and they're going to have 25 crock pots lined up. Do we have to have a staff member, like,
Yeah.
manning that?
Yes. Yeah, because they could be overloading the, yeah. I mean, you have 25 crock pots going off of one outlet.
Well, right.
You're
yeah.
not going to be allowed, yeah, somebody's going to have to come in and make sure that you're doing something right.
So if they're doing one, we still want somebody to watch them. I mean, could you make it like as deemed necessary, or I mean, because it seems very fine, like definite, like technology. Yeah, we'll let you know if you need our help or not. But technology, yes. If you have anything plugged in, and you know, you will have a staff member watching it. I just think.
Well,
that
the other
might
thing
be,
is, I mean, when, you know, we don't own crock pots, so that's not our equipment.
So, but it doesn't say school equipment. It just says use of electrical equipment in the building.
Well, no.
So is that implied?
The whole policy is about the use of school facilities.
Right. So does that imply electrical equipment that you own? Do you see what I'm saying?
I do like Michelle's suggestion to just add the phrase "as deemed necessary." So I think there are times when we probably are allowing groups to use electrical equipment and not requiring a staff member, right? Because it's such a broad term. So
Yeah.
I think if we put "as deemed necessary," then when you're questioning them about it, you can decide whether that they need staff or not.
Yeah, why?
I mean, does the application have a question on it, like, do you plan to plug anything in? I mean, it just seems like a little bit,
They're required.
what are we talking about here?
Yeah, they're required to tell us what they're, you know, if a group is coming in, yeah, they're required.
What are you
to
gonna-
tell
what
us
are you
what
gonna
their
bring?
setup is, yeah,
Right.
what they're planning on doing. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So anytime you plug something in, you have to have supervision? I mean, this just seems ridiculous. I'm sorry, I'm having,
No,
I'm having trouble parsing out.
We'll just add that. I think we're taking it, again, we're taking it beyond the scope of, that's not school facility. We're not, if somebody brings in an extension cord to plug in some Christmas lights for some, that's not the use of our electrical equipment.
Then I think we just want to say that it's.
Yeah.
But I think the.
Or specify in the policy what you're talking about, which is bringing in non-school equipment subject to approval or something, or supervision.
No, we're not talking about bringing in non-school equipment. We're talking about.
Well, you just said about the Christmas lights. I mean.
Right, he's saying this doesn't
I'm saying
apply
that
to
doesn't cover
because
that. This policy is not about
doesn't
that. The
apply to
policy is about school facilities.
But the plugs are school facility. The
Yeah.
outlets.
Right, but the electrical equipment is.
So you're going to put as deemed necessary?
Yes, yeah.
That'll give you the discretion if you
Yeah.
need it. Maddie?
I think that, I mean, if you've ever rented space for anything, you typically let the people you're renting know even what you're bringing. I've
Right.
had to do that, just so and then as deemed necessary covers it, because they have looked over the application and they know if there's anything that they're worried about. But that's not why I raised my hand.
Good, get out this tab.
Section 2, F, that, I think I understand what it means. You're trying to differentiate between community members and organizations, that the two are treated differently, but it just seems a little fuzzy in the writing.
Yeah,
Is
no,
that
that's.
the intent?
Yeah, so, that's something that has been going on all along. It's basically anybody is free to use the school grounds at any time. And that's always been. However, if a group wants to use Freeport United, let's say, wants to hold soccer games or practices on the grounds, they can't just walk on. They need to reserve it.
So I would just suggest the second sentence, just restructure that sentence. So you're saying, however, recognized organizations and groups must be granted permission, formal approval. Just make the subject of the sentence, not that I'm an expert in sentence structure, but it just felt a little, it wasn't super clear. I understood it, but I would just, see what I'm saying? However.
So not changing anything other than moving the back of the sentence to the front of the sentence.
Exactly. However, recognized organizations and groups require formal approval for use of buildings and grounds. Something like that.
Now, what happens if it's not a formal group, but it's birthday party, and they decide to hold a birthday party in the playground at one of the schools? Would they be considered a group that requires formal approval?
They are allowed to go on and use it. They cannot reserve the space.
But they can go and have their party at the school grounds if they want to? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, people have done that. I mean, they go to the playgrounds all the time. But yeah, I mean, the intent is not to keep people off. It's just to say, again, like, if they go on and then, a team from the school shows up, it's like, I'm sorry, we need the space. Oh, okay, well, we were here for a birthday party. I'm sorry. It's that kind of a thing, so.
Is there any time constraints around? So is it legal to be on the playground at 3 in the morning? I mean, is there any safety issues? Because we don't necessarily light everything, and
They're district-owned properties. I mean, I don't know that there are any reasons that people, we haven't, that I know of, posted any signs anywhere other than, I think maybe the tennis courts that say they're, after dusk.
closed after dusk.
Yeah, or after dark or something like that. It's never been in any of the policies. I don't feel, let's put it this way. It's one of those things probably where if we ever had a problem, we may want to address it. I don't think that we have a problem. Not that I'm not going to anticipate a problem at this point.
Okay.
So.
Jeremy?
On section 4, letter N, talking about animal licenses.
Yes.
I know this is kind of ridiculous, but know in the past, like Warm Street, they've had like sports arts there. So I don't know if we need to add more of the approval of the building administrator.
They've had what?
Sports arts, like the animal guy.
Oh.
I don't think that needs to be in here, because we basically defer, that would be another policy. So we defer here to the school board policy on animals. You know, that's basically a building issue.
The policy is for service animals, so that doesn't
Right.
talk about animals. I know it's ridiculous, but I'll
Yeah.
talk about the duck girl. The duck girl is bringing in.
I don't know as though we have, I don't know as though that this would be the place to do it, because I think what you're talking about is a policy that relates specifically to school use.
Right, that's a curriculum.
That's a curriculum issue? Yeah.
But what if an outside group wanted to sponsor, you know, the wildlife rescue people to come show all the hawks and?
Then what would happen is they would have to request it, and then we would have to look at making an exception, which we can make any exception when it comes through me and I go to Becky.
Okay.
You know, so that's, you know, I think anticipating that, you know, a specific use, that if we put it in there, may open us up to allowing a use that we may not want to allow down the road.
Kate.
I have a couple questions back on the electrical equipment I wanted to ask at that time. I'm sorry that it's been a couple minutes since we were talking about that, but I was wondering if audiovisual equipment falls under the technology or?
Yes.
Okay.
It does.
All right.
Yeah.
And then the other question or other point I wanted to make regarding electrical equipment is I'm going to kind of go against the grain here and say I actually would like us to, I like how the policy is written where it would apply to the use of electrical, I don't think it needs to be distinguished as district-owned or school-owned. I like the idea that we are managing what people are bringing from home and plugging in to our outlets. So I disagree that we shouldn't be keeping tabs on those sort of things.
And I don't think we shouldn't keep tabs on it. I just feel like it's overly cumbersome, I think, burdensome to say that anytime something's, now, if somebody wants to plug in a fog machine, yes, we probably want to know that ahead of time and maybe say no, or if we're going to say yes, have somebody watching it. But I just think the way this is written, you plug in your iPhone, that's an electrical equipment, you know? Or maybe that's technology and it doesn't matter. I don't know.
What I'm getting at is when we were talking about that, David was saying this is for RSU 5 electrical equipment, and I disagree. I think it should be for any
equipment
as necessary or whatever.
Right. So we can manage any of it.
Yeah, and I think if we add that, you know, as deemed necessary, what it means is that if they're bringing something in and they say, you mean we're not allowed to plug in our iPhones? Oh, no, you're fine. Plug in your iPhones. I don't care. But then, you know, the example of the 25 crock pots, no. You know, or yes.
You might not want to come on
We
Saturday
need to
night.
have, you know, I'm going to ask Dennis to get out the schematics of the electrical system and find out where they can plug them in. We actually did that at the high school one time. And, you know, at the high school where for several years, we had a pizza challenge. And it was a school event, but they were bringing in ovens, and so we had to lay out the schematics and tell them, you have this outlet, you have this outlet, and so it's that. Those are the kind of things that I think we're really looking for.
Is 24-hour cancellation policy sufficient? I mean, don't you need more time? Usually when you cancel something, they ask that you give a little more notice than 24 hours?
For the use of the school buildings, we didn't want it to be too onerous. I mean, really, With 24 hours notice, we can cancel a custodian. We can cancel staff.
But can you get another group that may be interested in using the same slot? I'm thinking of multiple users and giving everyone an opportunity if someone cancels for another group to use.
I don't think, you know, the spaces that are used a lot, like the gyms, nobody's going to jump in with 24 hours notice and say, oh yeah, now I can use it. They've already made their arrangements. So I don't think it's going to, really what we just didn't want to do is penalize people that their event fell apart 24 hours ahead of time, and we just aren't, you know, we don't want to charge them for that. That's really where that came from. Because most of what we have is, you know, and again, the other thing is we can decide deposits we don't ask for them, but we can kind of make that determination if somebody is you know, it's left open for us to do those kinds of things. If somebody cancels 3 times after reserving, you know, the Durham gym 4 weeks in a row, and you know, and they've done that 3 times and canceled each time. Well, you know, if you want it now, then you're going to pay for it up front. So I'd rather not, again, tie us into make it too onerous, because then we're chasing things down that you know, a nonprofit group is canceling an event, it's because they're not making anything, let alone a profit. So.
Lindsay.
I'm kind of curious about during school. I don't know, I always find it kind of not clear what groups or organizations might fit into the school day, you know, school's program versus not. So,
None.
So like, you know, we have
That's easy.
oh wait,
It's easy.
none.
Yeah, during
None?
the school day, it's the only thing that really kind of moves around during the school day is schools coming into the high school. That's it.
Voting.
And that's
Couple times a
my.
year.
you mean
that's
like
my life.
colleges doing a college?
No,
do you mean
I
schools
mean
coming into high
RSU
school?
schools moving to the FPAC. That's the primary movement within our schools during the school day.
No, but
I
like
couldn't
I'm thinking
tell
of
you-
like, you know, say at the high school, there's, you know, all these study abroad companies that come and it's part of the school day where, isn't it part of the school day where they're, or are
No.
these evening programs?
The semester abroad program is run in the evening.
Oh,
However,
okay.
there are times when groups that are not part of that, and they have a semester program, that they do come in and they offer that. That's through the guidance office, and they're usually held in the guidance office or the library or something like that, and they run it. That's all during the school day and overseen by the school. It's curricular.
Okay, so if someone's interested in, you know, sharing something with the students, they talk to the principal of the building and say, I have this proposal for you, please consider it, and then the principal considers it.
Yep.
If it's outside of the school day, someone would contact you.
Yeah, there are times when they come to me as well,
And
and I will say, oh, you know, we tried to, well, actually we did. The event last year with the group from Mongolia contacted me, and I got in touch with the high school, and we, you know, were able to work something out. I've had groups contact us, but it's always, we're not going to do anything in the schools during the school day without it being vetted through the building admins and being part of the curriculum.
Should that be in here?
No, I don't,
Just-
no.
I think it
That's
states that it's
curricular.
outside of the regular school day and curriculum of the, you know, what we're doing.
Yeah.
Like, we don't want anything like, you know, all requests for, you know,
No.
use of facilities while
No.
school is in session, please
If it's
contact
use
the
of
administrator?
if it's something related to the schools and their curriculum, they They can come to me, but I would never make that decision without going to
No, I'm not
them.
suggesting you would make the decision. I'm suggesting it is community use of school facilities. It could be in someone's mind, community use of school facilities to, do a program sharing about, military service or, whatever, some of these guidance programs. If someone outside of who doesn't have experience with this, we're looking in the well, I guess they wouldn't look in the policies. They'd call like the school office or something.
Yeah, see, I don't see that as community use of school facilities. I see that as curricular use. The guidance offices are part of the curriculum, and they're part of the school, and they
Okay.
would make those decisions.
Kate?
Is there any policy related to leaving a vehicle in the parking lot at a school overnight? Or even during the day?
I know that at most schools, it says something, central office, we've actually had to put things out there, but people only pay attention to it periodically. But we don't have anything at the schools, and again, people will look at it occasionally, and very occasionally, as a park and ride. They go and they need to meet somebody, they leave their car overnight, they come pick it up in the morning. We've never, I think that falls under that. We haven't had a problem, let's not put it in anticipating one. We can deal with it if we have to. That would be my suggestion.
All right, so this is the first read. Oh, Valerie?
This is more grammar than anything, but loss or damage. It reads, any non-RSU group shall assume liability for the loss or damage of articles brought to the facility. Can we say RSU shall assume no liability for the loss or damage of articles brought to the facility? And can we then say users or are responsible for any damage to the building, grounds, or equipment that may occur during use?
Well, I don't see what, well, hold on. I don't think it doesn't change the
Doesn't change the
meaning.
meaning, it just reads a little clunky the way it is now. Just say any non-RSU group shall assume liability.
for the loss and
I mean,
damage.
all we want to say is that RSU doesn't assume liability for any.
No, I think
damage.
we want them to assume we don't want it for just us not to, but we want them to. So
Yeah.
I think it's fine the way it is.
Yeah, I think it's one thing for us to say we will not assume any liability, but then it doesn't put the onus on anybody if we don't say they will assume it.
Okay, that makes
So
sense.
that's kind of why I put it like this. But
That makes
Okay.
sense.
I'm just following up on Lindsay's question. So is this policy really intended for outside of the school day? And if that's correct, should we say that upfront, use of the school outside of the school day?
I wondered that too, but I was thinking about Freeport, when they use the school for voting, that's during the school day.
Here too, yeah.
Is that something, do they pay, or do they have to pay for custodial, or how does that work?
Well, they're already here,
If
so they
they're
don't pay for
munis-
extra custodial, and they're a
Well, no,
municipality,
they
right?
do.
So-
They do,
They're
because.
municipal.
Oh, when they set up ahead of time.
Because the setup and depending on, the timing and the breakdown, they are required to pay for things like that. Yeah, again, I think if we specify that it's outside of the school day, it kind of then ties us into, well, this happened during the school day. I think, basically, the fact that the policy is to obtain the maximum use of the facilities to the extent consistent with the primary educational function of the school.
That's what I just underlined.
Period.
Yeah.
So the primary function is educational. If we can use it outside of that at any time of day, and somebody wants to, and it doesn't interfere with it, then I think we do it. And we make it available. I think, again, the more limitations we put in, the harder, the more somebody's going to be picking at it and, say, well, I don't want them to get out of not paying for something or not following a regulation because something does happen during the school day. Does that kind of make, okay.
Okay. I think there was just a couple of minor word tweaks, but you got those, and we'll, okay. So do we have a motion on the first read? Valerie, second from Lindsay. All those in favor? Opposed?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Michelle? Okay, Michelle Lee.
You did. You're welcome. Hello, everybody. See the purple paper in your packet? It's on. Is that better? All right. So nothing out of the ordinary again. I'm happy to report. We have had a couple things that I think I spoke about last time that were approved by the Finance Committee that we are putting into place now. So one of the things that Sandrine, our HR coordinator, is working on heavily is the recruiting software. She spoke with Dennis today in reference to the first applications, and he's already starting to love it. So that he's kind of our test subject right now because we always have something there, like a sub that we need to hire in his area. So he's actually really, really loving it, and it will be coming out to all of the administrators soon. So we thank you again very much for approving that. Sandrine is loving this, I can tell you. As far as finances go, everything is going according to plan. We're doing fine on the track and field and the construction projects. I have no news for any of that at this point in time that's concerning in any way, shape, or form. And as far as the HR side goes, we've got, other than the two recent resignations, everything's going fine on the HR side as well. And we're hoping to get some good stuff on the recruiting software, I can tell you that. Lindsay?
The school nutrition, we have 0.37% left. Is that because they pre-order like everything for the year?
Sorry, we encumber it for the year. We know that we're going to be paying that for the year, so we encumber the entire amount at the beginning of the year.
Well, don't we do that for like everything, like salaries and stuff too?
So our software isn't designed to do it for salaries, and this was something that Kelly, prior to me, was working with Encode to try and do. Encode's never been able to do it for salaries.
Oh, okay. So you may recall her saying, "I'm still working on the encumbrances."
Oh, I do. I don't think I knew what that meant though at the time.
I think that's what it meant.
It hasn't changed. We still have the same software, so we can encumber expenses. And I know salaries are expenses, but Encode looks at salaries differently.
Oh,
and so we can't encumber those.
And then I should know this, but I don't. Article 4, VOC E assessment, is that Region 10?
That's Region 10.
And
we also
pay
do
for
the same
that up
thing.
front?
We don't pay for it up front. We encumber the entire amount.
Oh, we encumber the entire amount because we know what it's going to be. And
we know what. We get the bill at the beginning of the year, and it's divided out over 10 months.
Oh, okay.
So has John really gone over his budget by $6.26?
Yes, ma'am. We rounded it. We had a round figure, and then we got the actual bill. So.
Fair enough. Any other questions for Michelle?
Yeah, I'd like to. Michelle, can you just speak to the nutrition? I know I didn't ask you this in advance, but I just think it's a bit of good news. And,
yes.
And I know your numbers may not be exact because I didn't
so
ask
I will
you to
be
prep
working
for
from
it.
memory for this. I did a rundown of the school nutrition program. I took out the additional piece that we gave. Remember, we gave an additional $111,000. It looks like we're to the good about $30,000, even taking out that additional piece. So participation has gone up enough that she's actually earning.
And we've never been in...
No. Well, not in the last 2 years, for sure. We have not been in this situation.
I don't ever remember it being in positive number, so that's good.
So,
please congratulate her for us.
I will. I'll let her know. Sure.
Do you mean that she's paid off the remaining $111,000
No.
too? No.
No. I'm just saying for the current year,
Operationally this
she's
year.
actually making money.
Oh, okay.
for just the current year. We're not talking about any prior catch-ups.
Okay.
The hole isn't getting bigger.
Correct.
Okay.
But every year prior to this year, that program was in the red consistently.
Right.
So it's in the black now.
Yeah,
And with
yeah,
a little
I
extra.
get that. But do you know if it's participation, what's driving it more, the participation or the increase in the fee?
Right now, I think it's the participation.
Or good purchasing, right? I mean, the expenses too, right? It could be that.
The expenses seem to be running pretty close to the same. So it really is revenue.
Better food. All right, we'll take it. All right, any other questions for Michelle? All right. So we will move on to the Pownell Elementary School Goal Review. Ms. Demick.
Good evening. Cynthia's going to pass out for you just a one-page summary on last year's goals, and then I updated the goal sheet for this year. I just had some additional baseline data, so I just added the baseline data so that you would have it there. So we set quite lofty goals last year, and we did not hit the first goal, which was to increase the percentage of students meeting their growth targets from 63% to 68% in reading and 62% to 67% in math. You may remember in your conversations about the NWEA, they predict that between 40 and 60% is where the growth targets will land. I've had better luck than that in my own classroom, so set quite a lofty goal, and we didn't hit it. One of the things that we tried last year was to introduce what's called a lift block, which was a 30-minute, here in Durham they call it a flex time. You've heard Emily talk about it at Mass Landing. One of the things that makes that especially challenging in Pownell is that you have one class per grade level. So when you're trying to sort of sort and resort students to do that work, it can be challenging because you don't have a lot of partnerships. So one of the things that we did last year was to bring the specialists into that piece. And so say, for example, Patty Francis, the librarian, would offer, an additional maker space in the library, or Carrie Crossman might offer an additional technology opportunity in the in the computer lab. And as the leadership team sort of analyzed that, one of the things that we felt was that kind of distracted from really sort of intensifying for students sort of just right academic goals during that time. So we've kind of pulled back and tightened up on that. And the other piece was, in order to find an extra 30 minutes in our day, we kind of shaved off, okay, you're going to get back this 30 minutes, we'll shave off 10 minutes of math, 10 minutes of reading, 10 minutes of writing to dedicate to that time. And teachers found that they feel like that also had a negative impact on instruction. So we've reduced the amount of chorus time that students have this year and shifted to what's called a 4+1 schedule, where they have 4-hour or 70-minute blocks and then one 30-minute responsive block, which both everyday math and the units of study are sort of built for. And teachers are reporting that continuity and then with that responsive time, that feels like a better way to get that 30-minute block. And you'll see in the goals for this year kind of another way we're sort of responding to that. One of the things I like to do when I'm digging into the data is to really look at like where the triangulation is. How is it that our Fontes and Pinnell assessment information is lining up with our MEA assessment information, is lining up with our NWEA assessment information? And this year for us, when it came to math, the NWEA assessment didn't really line up to what we were seeing from the MEA results and what we were seeing from the classroom work. So we're watching that carefully, but we're not overreacting to that. So one of the things when you have such a small population is 2 or 3 kids can give you, a 10% shift in your data pretty quickly. So it's something that we're just watching and going to kind of continue to kind of work on for this year. Last year, we also started with a book study around growth mindset, and this was an area that both staff and students have responded very positively to. Students are using that language now. Teachers are finding more and more ways to incorporate that into what they're doing so that we can really sort of help students to sort of see taking on challenges as interesting and rewarding, and not looking at if they have to struggle or if they have to work hard at something as that means they're not smart. So we're doing a lot of work around that and around flexibility. We use the power outage and the move to the high school as a great opportunity to kind of really talk about how to be flexible, and we really feel great about the kids sort of really learning how to incorporate that language into their daily lives. It works well with the Hattie work as well around high impact strategies, so that's how we're kind of tie it into this year's work. We really explored some different avenues with technology last year. We found having Chromebook access for writing was a great way to encourage revision for students. We subscribed to SumDog, which is a personalized, differentiated math program that adjusts to students, and the students found that especially engaging. The teachers really couldn't sort of see a cause-effect relationship between the work that they were doing with that and then our student achievement. So, we're just kind of watching that piece too. Last year, our secretary and I were able to sort of transform the Panther Press into a digital version so that it could be more encompassing and include more student work. We're always looking for ways to make reading and writing authentic for kids, and that was one of them. So we had set as part of that technology goal, including at least 10 pieces of student writing or student drawing or some sort of student work as that, and we exceeded that with 18 pieces. So that's kind of a summary of kind of what happened last year. This year we've decided to focus in more, and when I tunneled into both the Fontes and Pinnell assessment data and the MEA data, what we really found was that the strategies of reading around the analytical and inferential comprehension were an area that students were struggling with. Teachers felt like they were teaching it, but it wasn't necessarily sticking, so that when they did it independently on an assessment, they could really see, we could really see that was a place that we could really boost our students' critical thinking skills if we tunneled in that way. Also, in looking at last year's goal, we thought that if we sort of narrowed our focus and really were relentless about coming back to comprehension over and over again, we would be more likely to see positive results in 1 year's time. We also saw that had great connections to math as far as the more multi-step word problems that kids need to unpack, and the open response problems that are part of the work that they're doing now. So we saw that correlation. In looking at Julie Nickerson's data at Moore Street, they had spent some time as a second grade PLC really working on the open response, and so I thought, okay, that's work we could do when we looked at the kindergarten through second grade SLOs as a way that we could boost the percentage of students that are achieving their yearly math goals. Oops, that's this year. We also restructured the PLCs. Again, when you're a small school, last year our teachers were in PLCs of really just 2 people. So our K and 1 teacher met together, our second and third grade and our fourth and fifth grade teachers met together, and then our specialists met as a team. And one of the parts of response to intervention is that you're really working together in your PLC to strategize when you're sort of having those head scratcher kids, or you're looking at ways to sort of improve instruction. And so we've shifted that to a different time in our week so that we could have both our resource room teacher and our strategist, and have one for primary and one for intermediate that meets every other week. So we're feeling like that's much more focused on really looking at student work together with protocols, and really helping each other to sort of lift the level of the work. I also mentioned in that one just the implementation of all-day K, because one of the things we were seeing is that we were getting comparable results at the end of kindergarten level, but where we were seeing the data not necessarily align with the rest of the district was in first grade, because it was taking kids time to really kind of get sort of that routine of being in full day school sort of under their belt. And so we were feeling like the pace of progress in first grade would be something that we'll see some benefits to having all day K with. So that will obviously be a year out. Our second goal is around unpacking the Hattie's most influential practices, what works best in education. I think it can be kind of dangerous to just sort of look at that as a laundry list, because if you don't dig into sort of what do all of those analyses say, you can make faulty assumptions. So for example, the homework, the homework effect size, they had a very different result for elementary than they did for secondary. So we're spending a series of our staff meeting time to really kind of unpack some of those practices and really help sort of build teachers' sort of strategic stance around the decisions that they're making with what they're doing in the class, and then with what we're working on all together, because it's that collective efficacy of us all working together to move kids forward that, Hattie shows as his biggest effect size, has the most impact on student achievement. Most teachers, we did a survey, and most teachers report themselves at the very beginning levels of understanding that work. They've heard it, but they haven't really had the time to kind of unpack with that. So 75% of them reported that they were at a beginning level, and 100% were either at a 1 or a 2 level on sort of their understanding with that. The third goal you'll probably see again from me next year. We're starting as a district to really work on what we're calling our RTIB, that response to intervention around behavior. And what we're finding is that teachers have less tools in their toolbox when they get a particularly tricky student that is having trouble with self-regulation, or is really having issues with anxiety that are causing sort of school refusal issues and issues of behavior. So we're starting to sort of build those tools and work together around helping to kind of have more strategies for folks when they're trying to support someone. Because as we looked at our special ed referrals, what we were finding was it wasn't necessarily a processing or disorder or another sort of cognitive function that was getting in the way. It was really a behavioral issue that was impacting their availability for learning. So we felt like it was a place to start really building up our skills. So that's what we're about this year. Any questions?
Well, you obviously did an excellent job.
Yeah. I can't believe it after listening to that policy. It's like, oh boy, get ready, right?
You never know what we're going to want to talk about, Lisa. I've stopped trying to guess. I'm going to guess Valerie has a question, though.
I do have questions. The first goal, Lisa, where you mentioned that the MEA scores you want to increase from 45 to 55. It just says MEA subscores. Is that for both math, for ELA, for any specific grades, any
No,
specific
so we were
groups?
really looking at, if you look at the beginning part of that, the proficiency with inferential and analytical reading skills. When I looked at the subscores, those were consistently across different sort of levels of student achievement. Those were coming out as relative areas of weakness. And so it really felt as though, and it also piggybacked with the new version of Fontes and Pinnell, where those analytical reading skills, you know, the comparing multiple texts, the looking at author's purpose, those kinds of skills were places where teachers weren't seeing that the lessons that they were doing were really sticking, that kids needed more work with that to really own that kind of work, which makes sense because those are the highest level thinking skills. So my goal was around moving that specific subscore.
And this is a weakness that you're identifying K through 5, so throughout the school.
Yes, because it was on both the Fontes and Pinnell assessment that we were seeing it, and on the MEA.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
More just a comment about the Lynn Lyons workshop. I went to her talk in Yarmouth, but you did the longer workshop?
Yes.
I'm just thrilled that that's happening and that it's happening for teachers of younger kids, because colleges are reporting unprecedented numbers of kids with anxiety problems.
Yeah.
And for our district to be getting ahead of that is wonderful. I'm excited to see you doing that work.
Both Tatiana Green, my nurse, and I went to the full-day workshop, and we brought it back to the staff meeting, and the staff really was excited about it. And we actually purchased her DVD and have actually used it with families, and have encouraged families to go to that. I think she's amazing. I was apologizing to my own kids like all through the day because I made lots of mistakes.
So Lisa, a follow-up question about the inferential reading skills.
Yep.
Is that what's causing the lower than in the rest of the district scores in MEA for reading?
So I'm not happy with my reading scores in the MEA. That's part of the reason that this became our goal for this year. We're consistently in math and science scoring in like the top 10% of the state. And so if our kids can do it in math and science, they certainly should be able to do it in reading. When I see the gap between where Pownell's scoring versus where the state average is, it's much farther apart in math and science than it is in reading. So I felt like we really needed to take the time to tunnel in to reading. And when I unpacked the scores, it seemed as though sort of the data all aligned, that comprehension was the place we really needed to put the focus, and especially on those higher level comprehension skills. Yeah.
I thought I remembered seeing charts showing that across the board, our math scores everywhere were less than reading. Am I misremembering that, or am
I think that was because they were reported by district. So it was fourth grade by the district, or it was fifth grade by the district.
School level.
No.
Oh, all right. Well, thanks for looking out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have one more question.
I'm sorry. I thought your hands were down.
I thought Maddie had a question. Did you have a question? No. Okay. The second goal about Hattie's work.
Yes.
So the aim, and I know that you explained it, but what is the final goal of exploring Hattie's work? What is the aim in terms of?
So what he says is that it's not what works in education, it's what works best in education. And so, for years now, his meta-analyses have shown that there are certain practices that get you a better than average sort of boost to achievement. And so in order to sort of know, even some of those are common practice. But if you don't really understand his work, you're not as able to deliberately make a decision of, I'm going to continue this practice. I feel like for teachers, the state's saying you do this, and this is, 4 superintendents later, you're working on this or you're working on that. I felt as though sort of building teachers' capacity to say, it's not just in my gut that this works, that there's really good research behind it. And so I feel as though it will have long-term positive impact on student achievement. Right now, my impact is on sort of teacher awareness and how they build those skills. I think what you'll see is that some of the other principals have taken a particular goal, around feedback or around goal setting. Those are all practices that are embedded in his research. I just wanted to kind of take the view of, let's get some background sort of built so that when the budget puts in something like early intervention, the teachers have an understanding of why. So it was to really just sort of build that knowledge. And because I think there's a little bit of a danger in saying, homework works when you really need to look at, well, it shouldn't be more than 60 minutes, or it works better in this place than that place. And so it was just really trying to make sure we were informed users, not just sort of surface, our knowledge wasn't surface. So we're working on our own critical thinking skills as a staff too.
Okay, and the reason why I ask is I'm curious to know if when you're looking those analyses, I know that Hattie is, his study is a study of, it's a meta-analysis, so it's a study of other studies.
Right.
But I have been doing some research, and I'm concerned that we're only looking at Hattie and not other work, because there are a lot of critics about his standard deviation method and how that is applied, and the fact that not all the studies are vetted. Some are better than others, but they're all mixed in together, and also that there's not enough attention put to factors outside of the school, like family, culture, other environment, and how that affects kids and their learning. So I just wouldn't want, and Hattie himself says, my work is supposed to spark a conversation, but it's not intended to be used directly in a school setting, or to be used to determine educational policy. So I just want to make sure that people are looking at multiple points of view and not just focusing on one study, which, even though it's a meta-analysis, it has evidently some critics who have some pretty well-founded reasons to think that every study has a hole, and we don't want to look at one study and ignore the holes.
I've done similar work with Marzano's meta-analysis in the same way, and I think that those conversations happen as you unpack it, and you're right that Hattie will say himself, basically his big message is know thy impact, and for teachers to really think about the fact that they are change agents and can make a difference in students' lives. And so I think it's less about sort of being a blind follower, and more about sort of having those staff discussions around how does this translate in this setting. And I think he does address the other pieces. I think his guidance for us is really focus on what you can change. And he's really clear that involvement at home has a really high of peck size, but the kids we get are the kids we get. And so his advice to teachers is to focus on the things that you have control over.
Glad that it's taking it as a starting point and not an ending point, and that you guys are researching and looking at other opinions as well.
Yep, great.
I feel like this Hattie book keeps coming up so much that we should have copies available at the central office for board members to read or something, or I could buy a copy and share it or something. But I mean, it seems to be pretty pervasive in affecting some decisions, and I appreciate it. Do you have an extra copy or like a couple copies?
Get one sent.
Awesome.
There's a lot.
They're pretty
online, too.
expensive.
We can share.
That's right. Any others for Lisa? You good, Kate? Okay. Oh, okay.
Oh.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, you don't want one?
Not only does she not have one, she does not want one. Okay. Durham Community School goals.
Etch out anything with Hattie written on it that you're about to see in the next 10 minutes.
That's why I brought it up, because I said, well,
Yeah.
Hattie, more Hattie. It's like, hey.
I know. Free handouts. Free. Okay, so last year's goal was habits of work. That projector's going to come on, but we're not going to be using it quite yet. We'll just use it in a moment. So you're fine right now, and then we'll move in a moment. So I have just handed you a double-sided piece of paper that is, on one side, it gives you sort of a summary, which I'm going to just take you through, and then we'll look at the chart, and I'll sort of explain the chart so that hopefully it makes sense. You saw a version of that chart when we first introduced the goal last year. So our goal for last year was based on habits of work, and Mr. Sibley, you got a picture of your daughter out there, caught me off guard playing the guitar. So anyway, so our goal was on habits of work pre-K through 8. The work we had done was to look at what would the habits of work look like across the range of our school. And specifically, we're looking at sort of 5 subgroups within that that we felt broke down the uses of habits of work. We gathered that baseline data, and we set the target of improving each category by 1 step on a 1 through 4 scale, which I'll explain on that chart. Without exception, we achieved that. In several instances, there were significant improvements. The one subcategory that did not get to a level 3 was in assessment. And as we reviewed that, the goal of this area is on conducting summative assessments consistently or regularly. And the pre-K range for our school impacted this. Our elementary grades, we do not require regular summative assessments on habits of work. The emphasis is much more upon formative feedback and coaching with occasional summatives. And so from a language perspective, and that on our sort of rubric, you'll see that was in a 2 range. Some of the highlights of the work, we decided to explore and develop language that was focused on the developmental stages of pre-K 8. And we started with the same categories developed for the high school, and then grade level teams worked their way from that base language down to their level, the children that they work with. We explored different types of rubrics, again, which I'll point out to you in a moment on the screen, and determined that the best outcome for this work was to state the expectation of a 3, and then use frequency as the determiner for a 1 through 4. So rather than have language, there's a 1, here's a 2, here's a 3, here's a 4 across the board, trying to make this student-facing, which means that students could read it and respond to it. We found that it was getting so wordy and complicated that it was better to say this is what the expectation is, and you're doing it regularly or not consistently or with reminders, and we found better results with that. And then the emphasis was upon providing examples, which we think will remain dynamic. So as our work evolves, the examples for students may evolve with it, but the descriptors would stay the same. And again, I'll show you that in just a moment on the website. And then we developed a website to share those language and expectations and examples. So if you want to just flip to the chart for a moment. I tried to figure out how to convey all this on one piece of paper. And it felt like we should have some sort of dice and counters, and we could play a little board game on this when you look at it. But I'll explain it to you, and then hopefully it'll make some sense. The number in the left-hand side of each square was last year's baseline data. The number in the right-hand side of each square was this year's post-assessment data. So for example, if I show you the first box in the top left-hand corner of knowledge and understanding. So last year, for baseline data, 11% of the staff reported that that's where they were at relative to knowledge and understanding. Not yet comfortable with the habits of work and the role they play in a proficiency-based learning model. When we did the post-evaluation, 0% were in that category. If we move to the far end of that first row, 0% when we started this work felt that they were very comfortable with habits of work and the role they play, whereas when we had finished the work, 30% of staff felt they were in that category. So that's what the boxes mean. If you look at where that shading is, so those down you'll see in the column, the 2 column, that lighter gray, that was where the majority of staff were on the sort of assessment, if you like, our baseline data. And our goal had been to move each category 1 level to the right, or further along that 1 through 4 scale. And you'll see that in each of those categories, that was the case. So the majority in that knowledge and understanding row, 58% were a 2 with the baseline data, 63% were a 3 when we had finished the work. The bottom row on assessment was what I was just referring to. That had started as a 1, with 53% of staff reporting that they were not yet conducting summative assessments. And now it's a 2, I beg your pardon, with 52%. You'll see there's a significant number also at a 3. And what we really found was that was really more representative of our middle school staff who do summative assessments more frequently, whereas our elementary staff, if you look at the language for a 2, occasionally conduct summative assessments relative to the habits of work. So it made a little more sense as to why that category, although it had moved 1 level to the right, continued to be more of a 2. So up onto if you want to just position yourself so you can see the screen just for a moment. We'll try not to linger too long so you don't have to move too far around. Under curriculum on our school website, there's a link for habits of work. And then, for some reason, a little crunched up there. Hiram, could you just take us to the, click on more, and then learning targets and examples. And then if you scroll to the right first, outside of that box, Hiram, so that it moves, there you go. And then just, I'm not sure why, for some reason it's not projecting the whole piece for us. Up on there. No, it's not so much that. Can you? No, he's just not got his whole screen showing. Well, you can't roll to the right, Hiram, I'm thinking. No, I don't think you want to. This is why you need support when you've got to plug something electrical in. There we go, thank you. Which is why we have support. So I'm not worried about crock pots, I'm worried about presentations. So let's just take determination for a moment on the right. Thank you, Hiram. You'll see there pre-KK, determination, the language at the top, ability to set goals, persistence, effective use of feedback. That's the language that is across the district. And so then what does that look like pre-KK? Is the teachers look at, and we work through a whole different pieces on developmental language, developmental expectations for children. They worded that for students as, I can set goals, I'm willing to try and keep trying, I listen to and try to use feedback, advice/guidance to grow. And then the example is that they put, I keep practicing at home and at school, I can choose a goal, when I don't get it right, I can keep trying, I never give up. I think this last one's a little hopeful. I try without getting mad or sad. You want to just roll down a little, Hiram? So that's pre-KK. You know, you'll see there for 1-2, I can set goals, I'm willing to try and keep trying, I can try and use feedback, similar, but then the examples shift for 1-2, some of the language that they might use. So I write more each day, I use high frequency words to help with my spelling. I work hard to improve my work, I try my best, I say it's hard, but I can try it. So again, putting the language into their more developmental language. Maybe just roll right down to 7-8. And then, you know, there you get determination. I reflect on and understand my own academic strengths and weaknesses. When I find work difficult, I stick with it and work to complete it. I'm open to receiving teacher peer feedback and use that feedback to improve my work. And then there are examples, you know, if I'm having trouble with a topic, I study, ask a teacher, I come up with a break, I go to study support or ask a peer. Specific strategies that they are taught in 7th and 8th grade. I access my notes to help get through difficult work. I'm open to suggestions and use them to make my work better, etc., etc. So the language is there for each of the grade clusters, and the staff work together to try and build this progression of understanding and then expectation, so that when the students then do move up to the high school, that they're very familiar with what the habits of work are and how they affect the sort of everyday practices. So I don't know if you have any questions about last year's goal before we move on to this year's goal.
So last year's goal was really around the teachers, right? So this rubric is assessing the teachers' comfort or use of habits of work,
Yes.
not necessarily how it's working with the kids just yet.
Of using what work, sorry?
The habits of work.
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure. Because at first I thought this was kids. I was like, geez, those don't look like the habits of work that our kids are getting assessed on. But this isn't. This is the teachers' implementation of habits of work.
It's what the students are getting assessed on. So you will just see
Those are what our kids are getting assessed on, not this. Not the paper you gave us.
Oh, no. Yes, no. Sorry, I thought you were talking about this.
Yeah.
We can start that conversation again, it might go better.
No, I'm talking about the paper you gave us.
This was what we were assessing. So, you know, this is one of the pieces with the goals we work on. And at the end of the day, you know, we're working with our staff to improve our practices to impact student learning and student outcomes. So there are times where the goal assessment might be baseline student data, exit student data. Or there will be times when it will be baseline staff data, exit staff data, because the focus is being upon developing staff proficiency to impact student proficiency. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And to be perfectly honest with you, to shift the needle on student learning in 1 year is not that realistic. If you're shifting teaching practices that are then become embedded practices moving on, that's where the needle will be moving and slowly lifting. But there aren't too many initiatives that you implement in September that result in student scores in June. I mean, there certainly are some, and we use, you know, obviously those are part of our practices. But when you see some of these things, yes, this was, where were we as a staff? Where are we as a staff? So, and then that was part of the outcome. Valley.
So now that your staff is making good headway in understanding and implementing habits of work, is this work being also rolled out for the students in a way that you can track how much the students are progressing along a similar rubric? because you have your rubrics there for the students that in the beginning they may say, well, I don't use things properly all the time. Do we have a rubric now to track students to help them arrive to the floor where they can say, I use things properly all the time?
We don't have a piece of paper quite in that manner. And if I'm understanding your question, is there a sort of individual tracking process for each student for them to sort of monitor their progress?
Or at least for students as a whole, because now we have the rubrics and we're monitoring the progress for the teachers. But I would assume the next step would be to see how the teachers doing their work impacts the students doing their work, and just to make sure that all this gain that we see on the teacher side is reflected on the student side too, in terms of them being more respectful, prepared, engaged, and determined.
Well, where you'll see that would be in PowerSchool across reporting. So when we look at, in PowerSchool, we look at students' performance relative to habits of work. I think that, in the same vein of, there's not necessarily one thing that will have that quick tick. It's a multi-year process, and which I'm going to get to in a moment for our next goal. But, already what we're aware of this year with this work is that the way in which we specifically teach into habits of work, or for individuals, deficits in habits of work, is still work to be done. So refining our practices in that is going to be ongoing work. So I think that would show up relative when we look at, when we look at second grade habits of work, where are students? And to be fair, for the most part, most students are pretty strong with habits of work. Really what it's identifying is which students need support and intervention around habits of work. This is not, these areas are not generally, well, I wouldn't say this is, I'm not sure you're going to find this in a Hattie meta-analysis, but I would hazard a guess that when you've got pretty consistently 75% of students meeting the standard in reading or in math, you've probably pretty consistently got 75% of students meeting habits of work. There's probably a connection in that. Not always, that we know certainly of exceptions. But we already see that a lot of this work is going to identify what do we do specifically to teach in at Tier 1 or for interventions for students who do not have these good habits or executive function deficits that might go with it.
Though I have to say, based on personal experience, sometimes your highest achievers are the ones who are weakest in habits of work, because everything comes so easy to them that they never have to do all the things that most kids have to do to achieve. And then they come to high school and all of a sudden the floor falls from beneath their feet, and they don't have the habits of work that are necessary to succeed in high school.
Yep.
So I'm hoping that all the students, even the high achievers, are encouraged to.
Yes, I wouldn't suggest, as I said to you, I don't think it's just that high achievers are always, there's a correlation. We know certainly of exceptions on both ends. But I think what I'm trying to say was that already what we're seeing is this is not 100% of students who need a lot of instruction on this. This is identifying, a good percentage that will need that support. Anything other on habits of work? Yeah.
So are you using habits of work in terms of co-curricular eligibility, or how do you determine that?
We are. We had a little bit of a tough introduction to that this fall, because although we sort of piloted it last year, as often is the case, until something's really pressure tested, you don't quite find out where it leaks. So we used it for the fall season for eligibility. We had a few glitches on our end. We worked with Mr. Grogan at the middle school, Ms. Golko at the high school, and with Craig, and we were again looking at making sure we were consistent that the middle school experience for sports and co-curricular is going to be a building block to what children will experience or students will experience when they get to high school. There are a few differences just because of the nature of the scoring programs at the different levels, but the middle school programs are aligned, and we had gotten a little out of alignment in the fall season, but then we're now back in alignment for this round. And part of it was less. It was really more about what are the responses when a student was not eligible. So, but you know, we've now got that piece back in place. So yes, that was used, and it's continuing to sort of refine as we go.
And are the students and the parents made well aware of how that process is working or is going to work?
Well, we thought so. And so that was part of the refining. It was not just, it was about, you know, awareness of, it was out there, but it had to be more concrete. And it was really when, I think we have quite a lot of communication. People get bombarded with communication, and it's not until it actually affects someone, they're like, well, hold on a minute, what's this all about? And then we sort of say, well, we shared this and that, but it was not necessarily pertinent at that time. So we were, you know, looking at ways of making sure that student athletes are well aware, and that was part of it, was the timing. At our school, we had, it triggered into a lack of playing time earlier here than it did at the other schools, and that's what we had to align. So that kind of buffer was what then gave people a couple of extra weeks of like, oh, okay, so this is real now. And I think that's where some of that timing and communication piece sort of hit a barrier, was for some folks it became like, you can't play now. I wasn't aware of it.
Right, because I feel like I was feverishly checking Power School on a Monday morning to see if my kid could play on Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah.
And thankfully he could, but by the grace of God. Maddie.
So this is on the website for parents to see, and it's also what kids look at when they're talking to their teachers about their grade. So this is what's referenced. This
Yes.
is the doc.
Yes.
I found a little typo.
Oh, by all means.
I just was looking at, because I was really interested in 7 and 8, because I have an 8th grader.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, how's she doing? So just on respect, second from the last one, I listened to group discussions while thinking of ideas of my own to add in. It should be mine instead of your own, right?
Sure.
Yep.
Yep.
Just because that could be confusing.
Yes. No, I agree. Yep.
That's it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I have one more question about the impact of habits of work.
Sure.
Honors and high honors roll. What's the relationship between habits of work and getting into one of those roles?
We don't have on a roll.
You don't have here?
No.
Okay.
We haven't had on a roll for maybe 12 years.
Okay. Well, I guess there's no impact then.
Right. They do, I know. So we had switched to 1, 2, 3 quite a long time ago, and with that we had looked at honor roll at that point and just decided it didn't really fit. Yeah. All right. Good on habits of work for now. Thank you. And we hit that. Thanks, Hiram. So this goal, this is another teacher-based goal.
Was that just your first goal from last year that we've gone through?
Just a review.
For the first one? Or is that all of them? Okay.
Were we expecting another one from last year? No. I can make one up if you want.
Well, just make sure you met it. That's all.
Yeah, we did. So this one, and this goal, is staff related again. Do you all have a copy of this, I'm assuming? I'm not sure how it was presented to you. I didn't make the pack. Ginny sends the packets out, so I'm not sure what you see. So now we're going to talk about 17, 18. So what you just had was 16, 17. Right, so now we're going to talk about that one. Again, I'm not quite sure how you get that. Ginny just requires documents. So I didn't realize you had it in 2 pages, sorry. Now I understand why you're asking about the second goal. And the good news is we've already achieved it, I just told you, so. This one is staff-oriented again. It is contrary to Mrs. Demick's prior statement, it is focused right in on a specific skill of some of Hattie's some of his feedback, but some of his high priority work is around student feedback. And I'm comfortable and confident that this is a needle mover, if you like, that this is not some misinterpretation, because I think this is carried across from other people as well. So one of the very sort of top identified strategies is around the way in which students or learners, not just children, but receive feedback. And basically these 3 components to it that are identified around making really clear what the measure of success is. So it's obvious this is what success looks like. Then being able to communicate to the learner, this is where you are relative to success. And then following that up with, and here's the next step for you to move towards success. That those 3 steps included as part of a feedback cycle result in students hitting those targets. And it sounds obvious, and it sort of sounds like, well, don't you always do that all the time? And the answer to that is we don't. It does sound obvious, but there are times when we might say, this is what success looks like. Or there might be times we say, this is where you are. And there might be times where we're really good about saying, this is what you need to do next. But tying those pieces together in a sort of meaningful, manageable, predictable, consistent way is not something that is sort of pervasive throughout the day. So our hope is to develop our skills to make it pervasive throughout the day. And when I look at the work that our teachers have done with Teachers College and with Everyday Math, we really do see what the benefit of that continuum can be within a curriculum cycle or within teaching practices. So when the language is really quite consistent, for example, through our TC work and units of study, which means that a child coming into 5th grade has really been using this language and these practices for several years, and they're able to then really respond to them and continue that learning at a good rate. So the work we're looking to do is specifically around that aspect of feedback. We've wrestled a little bit with, so how do we measure this? This is a skill set we want to develop in teachers and develop in our practices and use. And you know, I just alluded to it a moment ago that it's not something that you're going to do and then say, okay, now that's done and now it's all working great. So we're looking at this as a 2-year goal. And already I can say to you that the paper you have has already changed a little bit in some of the strategies. I think one of the challenges with a goal, when you list out, if going into a goal, I've always sort of maintained that if you already knew exactly the steps you had to do to achieve that goal, then it's not really a goal, it's a to-do list, and you just never got around to it before. I mean, I think, right? I mean, if it's new learning, it's new learning, and you don't yet know quite what those steps and strategies will be, and so they do evolve. So whilst they listed some strategies and action steps there, I can tell you that they've already sort of changed as a result of the work we're doing. The outcome hasn't changed, but the way in which we're approaching it has changed. And the most significant change for that has really been that whilst we were looking at this school-wide, what we have found is that in order to really differentiate this for our teachers, so it's responsive to where they are at or where they need to move from, just like it would be for a class of students, that if we were doing this whole school, we had some who were ready to move at a different pace, some who had different questions. For example, our middle school team, they work as a team, but they all teach different subjects. Whereas in first grade, all the teachers teach the same curriculum throughout the day. So when they're collaborating, it looks very different because they don't have the same students, but they have the same curriculum. So they can talk very freely about, how did you do this? Or how did you solve that? Or how are your kids doing with this? In 7th and 8th grade, for our school, they have the same students because they teach them for 2 years, but they don't have the same curriculum. So their conversation might be like, how is so-and-so doing in your class? What are you doing to engage him or her? Or what has their response been? But it's less easy for them to say, what have you done to help them with their math? I'm struggling with their math. So as we looked at these differences across the school, what the leadership team and the staff decided was we were going to then focus this, whilst it's a school-wide goal, it's going to be led in context at the PLC level. So PLCs will be working in this at their respective level with the same outcomes, these 3 steps that I just referred to relative to feedback. In order to create some sort of metric, our anticipation is that for this year, the teams are identifying the context within which they're focusing their work. So for example, 4th grade is very much within reading. Then they are going to identify several students to focus on and sort of get some baseline data with just several students in the class, and work up from that through this remainder of this year, and using those sort of students as getting sort of feedback for them on the practices that they're developing, how effective they are. And then in year 2, when we hope to have done sort of the heavy lifting in year 1, year 2 is going to be much more about how do we use this regularly, and then what does that look like? And so I think our anticipation at this point is that in year 2, we will be choosing a different measurement where it might be, all right, we're choosing this unit of study in writing, for example, or in reading, and we're going to look at where students were at the beginning, where they were at the end, and how they moved based on the effectiveness of our feedback. I hope that makes some sense. I do recognize that it sounds a little gray, but that's sort of where we're at right now.
So when you say it's identified students will be focused on, I'm curious about that. First of all, I'm curious how many or how few and how identified, but I'm also thinking, won't this sort of become, how will a teacher, I would find it difficult if I was teaching one student, an identified student, in a certain way, and not, I would think it would seep into my style for teaching everybody.
Yeah, you're going to teach everybody. You're going to use this with everybody. But rather than try and then track data across 24 children, you're going to select, like 2 who are lower, 2 who are middle, 2 who are high, and just get a sense of like, how did it impact them? But your practices, you're not going to teach them differently and say, this is not a test of like, okay, we're going to see if it's better for them or for them.
There's no control
group.
Of me
to even think that way.
I thought the exact same thing, Maddie.
Right.
I thought the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. But it really is to keep it manageable until we actually, that's more to give us formative feedback on how we're doing, to keep shaping our learning, and then we'll get to the point where that will flip and say, all right, we're pretty confident this is what's going to be most effective, this is how we're going to do it, now let's see the impact across our children. Yeah.
So, I'm having trouble understanding how the effectiveness of this will be measured. So you're saying in your last square, the bottom of the page, the back side of the page, review the data with target students. What would that data be?
Well, it sort of goes along a little bit. To be honest with you, it's still a little gray, because you'll see that on December 6th, we're identifying target students and establishing baseline data. So that is, you want to ask me this question next Thursday, I might be better able to answer you, because that when we work on our school goals, I mean, just to give you a context for this, you know, we've had PD days so far this year, but we've had an emphasis upon math instruction, with consultants coming in to work with the district. We've had work around SLOs. So the actual school goals, they're not the only PD work that we do. So we actually have to, we plan out in the year what time we're going to dedicate to this. And so December 6th, when we have the early release next week, that's our first big chunk of time. So far we've had maybe 3 staff meetings to work on this. And then December 6th is, which is why I've said to you it's sort of evolved already as we go. So next week is when we're actually sort of zooming in on what that will look like, and how we identify those students and develop that baseline data. So I can't really give you a concrete answer at this point, but I anticipate that, as I was just mentioning to Maddie there, that it will be built around some students who, you know, across the range, sort of lower, middle, higher, and what we see in terms of if that group is, again, I'm going to focus on writing for a minute. If we're focusing on writing, when they start from a beginning piece of writing for their first draft, you know, what does that look like when they do their pre-writing assessment to when they do their post-writing assessment at the end of the unit? What improvements have we seen based around, and did it relate to sort of the feedback we were providing? If that makes sense.
So next year, here you have for the district goal, or underneath the district goal, you have your goal for the school, and you say that this 2-year goal is to improve the effectiveness of feedback from both teachers and peers to increase student achievement across content areas.
Mm-hmm.
So next year, once you have your baseline data, you've done your pilot study, you see if it worked with a select group of students this year, how are you planning on assessing the effectiveness on increasing student achievement?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
I think it'll be similar to what we just said. We'll be looking at potentially a unit and saying, all right, this is our pre-writing, this is our post-writing, and let's see on how well the students do relative to the feedback we were giving them. Are they improving at a rate where they're more of them are reaching sort of expected outcomes? I have to tell you, again, I don't mean it to sound elusive, but when it's a goal around new learning, we're learning this brand new. So I can make something up, but it's probably going to evolve. I mean, I think this is work that we're doing, and we're sort of sharing it with you live as we're doing it.
And did you identify this goal because you felt there was a weakness in this area, or how did you select this goal as opposed to a myriad other goals that you could have chosen?
Well, we worked on it with the school leadership team, and I think one of the pieces we recognize is we have quite a lot of student data in all sorts of different formats, and data in and of itself, you know, I think schools suffer from that sort of acronym of DRIP. You know, data rich and information poor. And so certainly one of the pieces we've done a lot with in literacy especially is around teachers conferring with students, and seeing that as really sort of the vehicle for moving individual students along with their specific needs. So if you have a class of students made up by yourselves, for example, you each may be in very different places with your reading. So we may be working on a similar standard within reading, but the sort of moving you along at your specific rate is going to happen through conferring. So that's become a practice. It's a piece that continues to be hard for teachers to sort of get in and get out of conferring whilst moving the student and not getting sort of stuck into a long conversation. So the effectiveness of conferring was sort of at the heart of this conversation, and then that idea of what does it look like relative to success? And that was an area that we feel like, you know, we do share different examples of success, but not necessarily relating it to where the child is then, this is what we're aiming for, let's move towards that. So that, I think, was how the conversation came up at leadership. And then looking through some work we had been reading ourselves about effectiveness of the different interventions that Hattie suggests, that's where we sort of come up with it.
And the only reason why I'm digging a little deeper into this is because when I see the rubrics and how they're being spelled out, you have 1, 2, 3, 4. Any child who gets assessed will get a score on that rubric. And each rubric is very specific about where that child is at. And that child can also look at the column 4 to see what success is like. So I feel that we already are doing this work in the district of letting kids exactly where they're at and what success looks like. So not to say that we don't need a specific school goal to improve in that area, but the way I look at it, we're already doing a lot of this work just by the simple fact that we are developing those rubrics and we're being very clear with the kids about what the expectations are for each assignment and each assessment. And
well, I would agree to a point, and I guess where I might differ is I'm not sure that all rubrics, for example, define what success is, because it's very hard to do that in 3 sentences, compacted into a box. And if you're looking about an in-depth piece of analytical writing, it's not going to define success. It's going to define separation from a 3 and a 2 and a 1. And often what you'll see there is more reference to thoroughness than actually the components of what success looks like. And you know, I think where we have real strengths with that across our teaching is in our related arts. I think that you will see phys ed teachers or art teachers or music teachers. You know, if you think about music for a moment, somebody who is learning a piece of music, they're going to be listening to that piece of music played at an excellent level and really understanding what it sounds like. And then they're going to be practicing their part of that music and getting specific feedback relative to how to improve it. And I think that we see that happen a lot in visual and performing arts in a way that we don't see in other content areas. And I think that when you see a child who perhaps isn't great at dribbling a basketball, but during the course of the season get really specific coaching on what it should be, what they do, and how to improve that skill. And the number of times you'll hear in those fields like, wow, I can't believe the improvement he or she made. And I think that that is where you're seeing examples of clarity about what success looks like, clarity of where you are relative to that success, and then specific teaching and coaching and how to get there. And I'm not seeing that happen with just a rubric. And in fact, some of our teachers have found that, which is why we did it with the habits of work, rather than have a rubric, having a statement of what success is. You know, that a big part of that was from our 7th and 8th grade science teacher, who had really found that she drifted away from a rubric and is just stating, this is what success looks like, and we're going to work until we hit success, and then we have found success that way. So, you know, I agree that we're moving in that direction, but I think that this is work that aligns with that. I think it's being more specific and concrete and targeted.
I absolutely agree. We all bring different perspectives. I have a 5th grader, and I'm thinking about him and his knowledge in what a successful piece in writing would look like. And looking at a rubrics is not going to tell him what his writing needs to have in it to be successful. And your example of music is a very good one, because he also plays trumpet. And so he does have that drive because he knows where he needs to go. With writing, it's much more abstract to him. And so I find that this idea of reiterating to students what here looks like where they are is really important, because I feel like in my experience as a parent, that is not clearly defined, especially in the primary grades. It's not clear to kids even what the point of school is sometimes. So, like, what you're trying to achieve is not clearly communicated to, especially the younger kids, I think. And so for teachers to be communicating that on a regular basis, I think it's really important. And it's not so much related to the 1 through 4. There's so much movement that can go on in 4 steps, and it's not to have it in 4 columns. All that complete arc of learning is not covered in a little box.
And I would say that with writing already, I mean, we'll use progressions, and students will look at pieces of writing and say, okay, you're a 2nd grader, and this is like 2nd grade writing, and this is 3rd grade writing, and this is not quite 2nd grade writing. But they'll be actually looking at writing and reading that and looking at those attributes. And it is interesting to watch how the children can respond differently to that, actually. So.
Maddie.
Thank you for explaining it in terms of conferring. It sounds like a coaching model, and I love that description, because I think so often, like, if we reflect on our own education, or even we look at our kids, we could say, well, our kid did really well in this class because they really connected with the teacher. And that whole idea of a good teacher being someone that you connect with has always had sort of a je ne sais quoi idea about it. But what I feel like what you've done is you're teaching every teacher how to do that. So not every teacher necessarily has that inborn trait and ability to connect easily and effectively, but by identifying, this is what success looks like, this is where you are right now, these are the things you could do better in this context to get there. I mean, it's just such a simple way for a teacher to learn how to effectively help a kid, and for a kid to feel understood. So I love this method. I'm excited to see what the results will be.
I am too.
It's interesting. I struggle sometimes when we look at the goals across the different schools, and you all come at it from a very sort of different place. There's sort of overarching, consistency, but how you approach it is very different. And yours, to your own admission, is very fluid, right? Like, how are you going to measure? I don't know. We'll see. So for me, it's hard in how I think, in my concrete thinking of, well, how do I know if you met this goal? I guess we'll know it when we see it, kind of thing. And then I look at another goal where it's a number. We're going to go from this number to that number. And then, but we spend a lot of time, this year looking at the goals we set for last year, and they went, they didn't get to the number we wanted, or sometimes they went in the other direction of the number. And then I'm saying, well, are the numbers helpful? I don't know. I'm torn.
Well, I'd say to you that I think that's a strength. So just, again, so you know.
Of me? Thank you.
Absolutely. Specifically you, actually. No, I think it's a strength for the district. And so, I'm sure you're aware that when we have administrative meetings or practices, there's plenty of time that as a district, we look specifically at hard numbers and talk about what do we need to do to move our kindergarten readers, for example, is the big theme this year. After a lot of looking at data last spring, real emphasis in kindergarten around children being able to talk about books and talk about their reading and be able to articulate their reading. And so our work with TC staff developers this year has been focused on that. Our work with our literacy consultants is focused on that. Across all 3 schools with kindergarten, that's the emphasis, and there's a real shared focus on that kind of level of work all the way through the grades. But then, I think it's important that when you have a district, no different if you have a business organization, that you want to have kind of incubator aspects to parts of the business. Because if everybody is just going in lockstep, there's no innovation, and you got to hope you're right. Whereas we learn from each other all the time, from like, oh, that worked pretty well, or that didn't work quite so well. And we get feedback from our peers, and obviously from Becky and Cynthia. So I don't want you to think for a moment that everything we're doing is just like all right, whatever, we'll figure out whether it works or not, because there's a lot that we do. This is new work, and because it's teacher learning, that's where it's a struggle to figure out how do we measure teacher learning as an impact on student learning. And yet ultimately, it's the effectiveness of the teacher that's going to move student learning. So, I mean, we can certainly create a student data point, but it would be disingenuous. It would, you know, we could hope for it to work, but I feel pretty confident that we will manage to increase the proficiency of our teachers with this work. And as we get more familiar with this work, we will be able to say, and this is how we're going to see it, you know, this is how we'll measure its impact with student learning. So I'm happy to give it, obviously we'll give an update next year, but we'll have that, you'll have that baseline data for next year's work.
And I guess I just want to add that just as you want us to differentiate learning for all your students, I think it's really important for us to model that at the district level and to trust our principals and directors to differentiate the learning for their teachers where they see that that's needed.
And I think we do that. I mean, we've had people get up here and say, hey, you know, our reading is amazing, and so this year we're really going to focus on math, or vice versa, you know, depending on what their information tells them. So, Kate. No, I pointed right at you.
I thought you pointed that way.
I know.
So I'm not as nervous about there not being a set measurement yet of effectiveness, because I think if it works, you're gonna see it in any data that you're looking at. You'll see improvement in the kids, and if you don't see any movement, then I think it's pretty apparent there was maybe a disconnect there, or it wasn't implemented the way you wanted to do it. I think it'll still tell you something, even if you don't know what you're looking for yet. And then I did have another point, but I think I lost it. Sorry about that.
Well, you know, I'll just add on to that for a moment,
Yeah.
Kate, is that we know what we're looking for. So we're looking for when teachers are conferring with students and giving them feedback, it's resulting in concrete improvement in student performance. That's what we're looking for. It's not that we don't know what we're looking for, it's that idea of how would you measure this is where they were and this is where they're at, between individual sections of feedback over the course of a unit. That's the piece of narrowing that down. But so, you know, we will have a metric, and I think it is important. I don't disagree to know, you know, if all this work is worthwhile or not. But it really is that, it's not what we're looking for, it's how would one measure that and single it out from other initiatives.
And to me, it's not whether feedback works. There's plenty of research on that we know when done well, you know, that it works. So it's not as if he's saying we're going to all go fly kites or something and hope that that results in improved reading scores.
Well, I hadn't mentioned the kites quite yet.
It's more, you know, measuring the effectiveness of, you know, our teachers implementing it well.
And I just want to be clear, I don't mean to say that a rubric does all the work that you're doing, absolutely not. What I'm reflecting on is that when my son comes home with a rubric, I ask, and the teacher and the class have had a conversation with the rubric, they've given examples of work for each column in the rubric. So I just want to make sure that you guys are not thinking that I'm saying that as long as you write a good rubric with three sentences, the work is done. That's not what I meant.
No, I heard you saying that seems to be work that we're already underway, and I agree with that, and therefore is this a priority? That was sort of what I was hearing, and not to devalue rubrics at all. I just think that and I would add to that explanation again, that the example you just gave is, you know, I think we do that as a class-wide and at a class level. And what we're talking about is at the individual level. So how do we support the individual who may be at a 3 to a 4 or a 1 to a 2, that we can give exemplars, but it's a limit to what you're going to do effectively to 24 learners in different places.
And I'm all for differentiation. So whichever way you want to differentiate, it's great with
Yeah.
me. Totally support it.
Thank you.
Now, I do have a question that's something a lot more, I mean, it's the other extreme of goal setting and how to look at moving that needle that you speak about.
Sure.
And when you look at the data for, many of the schools, but for Durham, you see that in math, basically from grade 3 to 8, from last year to this year, every single group of students scored quite a bit lower than last year. And I just wanted to ask, is that something that you've been giving thought to? What are the steps that you're taking to address a weakness, if there is a weakness, or have you identified the cause of why consistently all the groups scored lower this year than last year in math in the MEA?
I don't have that right in front of me right this minute, Valley, to speak really articulately to it. What I will say to you is that in certainly, we had drops at the middle school level, and a big part of that factor was just we didn't have teachers at the middle school level. So our teacher at the beginning of last year very sadly was sick and had to leave 2 days before school started. We were fortunate to have a long-term sub for the year, but it was not her forte or experience as a math teacher, and that person is responsible for teaching all 7th and 8th graders. So that was a challenge. And in 6th grade, we faced an extended period out for the math teacher. Again, and so in our school, that's all students. So there was definitely some factors there from staffing that we've looked at. And, but, I'd be happy to respond to that when I was actually looking at the information more clearly. Yeah.
I just have a question. So when we're picking goals like this on the school-wide goals, your goal is really exciting to me. I want to know if it's something that we see as needing improvement here in this school. Is that why maybe Valley's experience has been different, or are we thinking this will be kind of piloted, cutting edge, and then we can disseminate to the other schools? When we have all these differing goals and we see successes with one, how do we make sure that it's shared and implemented in the other schools?
So I'll start, and then I'll look to Lisa and Will to pipe in because they've been here longer than I have. But I would say we don't have great data for trends over time, but I will tell you that our administrative team is always talking to one another and sharing ideas of what's working, and I feel like they're all good listeners and they're not afraid to learn from one another. So that's what I would say. I wouldn't say that other schools are necessarily ahead on feedback. So if this really works here, that I think they would all be eager to learn from that. But I think right now, when I'm looking at the data, it's hard to say, oh my gosh, this school is just knocking it out of the ballpark, because I don't think you can just look at 2 years worth of data and start making those kind of declarations. I think it's always interesting when you see data of 1 year to say, I wonder about that. And as you know, we have identified math as a focus K through 12, and that's one of the things we are working on district-wide. But if the feedback works, I'm sure Lisa's going to be wanting to say, oh, well, this year we did a broad look at, Hattie and understanding his work, but now next year maybe we really want to focus on the feedback too. But, I'll also talk to Will and have them answer that about what they've seen over their time.
I think one of the opportunities that our teachers have is embedded professional development, where they're going to a school and really seeing, the work that's happening. And so I think that's one of the places where it's really beneficial for schools to kind of take on sort of different pieces and then sort of spread that wealth. And I would say that's already happening, where, you're in a different teacher's second grade class and you're looking at the goal setting work that's in the kids' reading bins and you're like, oh, I want to learn more about that. I actually contacted one of Will's first grade teachers about that RTIB goal because he and I had a conversation. He's like, oh, my first grade teacher just did this. And so I think it's one of the real benefits of being part of an RSU is we can incubate these goals in different ways and then really work to kind of build on each other's success. You can bet I'm stealing those success criteria on the habits of work. I mean, I think that it's, why not sort of piggyback on the learning they've already done, and that goes both ways. We all. I think one of the things I'm so proud of about our administrative team is there's not a lot of ego there. It's all about sort of taking and benefiting from each other's strengths, and I think it's part of what makes the district a special place to work.
Anything else?
Nope.
Thank
you.
You're welcome.
I mean it.
I think next time I'm going to bring a stool.
How many times have you been here? You haven't learned that yet?
Well, I'm not sure whether it's me or you.
Who did most of the talking? Okay, unfinished business, we don't have any. New business, we don't have any. Board comments, so Finance Subcommittee. Kate.
Okay, the Finance Committee met on November 8th. Yes, November 8th, and all of us were in attendance except for Michelle.
Yeah, I wasn't there, yeah.
Michelle R. And also in attendance were Dennis Ouellette and Dr. Foley. And what we discussed in that meeting was adding an additional $5,000 to the plowing contract. What we're looking at there is extending the current contract by 1 year with this increase for the additional parking and barriers at the high school. And with the new curbing, it takes more time and attention to plow it at the high school. So the reason we're looking at just doing this 1 year contract, if I can remember this correctly, this 1 year extension was because we wanted to pull in and do one bid for all of the schools. Is that correct? 5 years ago, the contractor bid $25,000 with the next closest bid was at $36,000. So the Finance Committee felt that adding $5,000 to this same contract was still in line with, it still would have been below what was bid by the next lowest bidder 5 years ago, so we didn't think that was unreasonable. Dennis explained that the new electricity contract savings that begin this November and December will more than cover that amount that we're adding to the plowing contract. And next spring, we'll be going out to bid for the next 5-year contract, and that'll be accounted for in the budget as an expected increase to next year's budget. And John made the motion to allow for the extra $5,000 expenditure. I seconded, and then the motion passed 2 to 0. Also at this meeting, we had a presentation of the draft audit by the auditor. Marge Hall from Barry Talbot Royer, this is the RSU's auditors, presented to the committee the draft audit of the RSU 5's financial statements for fiscal year 17. That's the school year 16-17. Marge reviewed the layout of the financials and went through the schedules and statements that are pertinent to making budget decisions. She showed that the RSU has an unassigned fund balance of $849,000. This is now within the 3% limit that the DOE expects. And Marge also stated at the end of the presentation that they had no findings in this audit for RSU 5.
Which is a good thing.
That's a good thing. No findings is good. No questions.
Listen, what did the auditor, was that discussed about the individual schools, PTCs?
Yes, we
doing their
did discuss that at
501c3?
that meeting. And Michelle L. said that by the end of this year, all of the individual schools, PTCs, will have to have established their own 501c3 status. Is that correct? And so that will get them out of the school accounts and have their own account separate.
Okay. Well, and Michelle, will you'll be contact, or? I will. Okay.
Yes.
To figure out how to do that. Okay.
Yes. So I think you're asking, is there going to be trained, like, you're going to cover all the
I know there's been
process for doing that with
Right,
the
or there's been
PTCs.
discussion of just getting one, you know, and then everyone getting it, you know, how it's going to work, so.
Our next meeting is December 13th.
All right. Policy?
You have in your packet of information minutes from the November 3rd meeting, and you'll see there's a list of policies that were reviewed and with no changes recommended, and one policy that was reviewed with revisions, which is here for a second read for you all tonight, the use of private vehicles on school business. And we have met again since these minutes. We met on November 17th and reviewed two policies. Class size we began to talk about and looked at policies from several different school systems, and we also looked at a policy on weapons, violence, and school safety, and some of those things will obviously be coming before you. We still have, particularly on class size, there's still more discussion to be done about a policy, and we'll be meeting again on Friday morning.
Yeah. Ready for the next? Okay. So you have in front of you EEBB. This is a second read on this. And so I hope that I've captured, if you remember, there was lots of feedback at the second read, and so I think that with the work with policy and Craig, Craig's moved over here now, with Craig, I think we've captured, I'm confident we've captured everything. So you'll note, I'll just point out a couple of the things that we changed from last time. So B, the general consensus around the B that is crossed out there on that first page was that it doesn't seem to fit here, it doesn't seem, it just doesn't seem right. So if you'll notice, move to the new section below, that will not be part of the policy, but I just put it on there so you can see that we moved it. So if you go to the next page where it says, there's a new heading that says student safeguards, we put that under A. So we moved it over there, and then we made an adjustment to that, which I'll get to in a minute. In C, we changed it to drivers. And in G, we crossed off G because it really, the wording from G and A was so similar that we couldn't figure out what different meaning it had, and so we felt it was a redundancy. So the real focus area for change for tonight is the student safeguards. So A is the moving over of the B, and then we also added the sentence, this does not include students driving each other to and from school or to and from extracurricular activities within the RSU. With conversation with Craig, he and I discussed that there are some sports where there is no transportation provided. And I think hockey and Craig, one of the skiing maybe? Oh, swimming.
So for out-of-district extra co-curricular activities where transportation is not provided, parents and students will be required to sign a permission form prior to the beginning of each season. So that was added. So we think we've covered that. And then there were no other changes, I believe, on the bottom. There might have been one word change, but because it was all new on the privately owned piece, but I'm not, I think that might have been from the first to the second read, one that we had changed there, so.
So Cynthia, on F, I thought we decided that we don't want them to be required to sign a permission form in advance. Or is that just for sports there?
Come on up.
Because we talked about, you know, there are times when we've had to transport kids for other reasons.
That's just for out of district.
Yeah, but I remember Jen Galgo, I marked that too, because she made the example of a kid who needs to go to Region 10, misses the bus, and someone from the school will drive that kid to Region 10. That's outside of the district. And she said it would be cumbersome to, I mean, she doesn't have a way to go to the parent, ask for a signed permission, and then take the kid to the school. They just call the parent, inform, and drive the kid.
Maybe sports should be a different piece then, because we have ice hockey players, we have swimmers who are in co-ops, and we say you have to get there, and we've been having them sign a permission form saying we're not providing transportation, you have to get there, and they circle the kid. You know, the kid can drive with other kids, they just drive with parents. There's 3 different options. Most of them just circle them all. But I think if we're gonna if kids are driving to South Portland for ice hockey practice every day, I think we want a form.
And I don't think we want to prevent you from having the form, but we do not. There are emergency situations that arise with students where we might need to put them in a car with someone without having an advance signed form.
So could we add in emergency situations? I'm trying to think what language we could do to make that work.
When we talked about it at the meeting, I think we talked about, just like in sports, they have a permission slip signed at the beginning of the season. We talked about maybe in the beginning of the school year when they get that packet and there's forms that if an emergency arises.
That's right. That's why we didn't.
But that is covered under Student Safeguards B.
They don't have to sign, I mean.
You have that spelled in there already. B says, for out-of-district extra or co-curricular activities where transportation is not provided, parents and students will be required to sign a permission form prior to the beginning of each season. So you are covered for the sports piece, which leaves F for non-sports related transportation, which would be cases like, you know, the one Jen provided, in which case you do not want to require a signed permission slip.
And I got to tell you, every time we've sat down, we've thought of a new example that we got to think about. And I have another one. So if you look at B, it just talks about where transportation is not provided. So we bus our kids to Bowdoin for indoor track practice. But if they live in Freeport on the other end, or if they live in Durham on the other end, we allow them to drive there, but they have to sign the form. But this just says where transportation is not provided. So, and also cross-country Nordic skiing, we provide transportation. Thank God we have kids driving their vehicles because we won't have enough room in the bus, and they drive to Pineland. So maybe we just remove the transportation piece, whether it's because whether or not we provide it or not, they have to sign a permission form. You know what I'm saying?
I think that I'd like some language right today so that I get a good, I mean, if we can come up with it tonight, we can pass it as edited tonight.
So is the proposal to remove B altogether?
No, I just think somehow it's whether we provide transportation or not, if they're going to drive on their own, out of district, then they need to sign a form.
I think the reason you had that in there is because usually the rule is they need to ride our transportation, right? We want them
Unless
on
we
our
don't
bus.
provide it.
Yeah, the only exceptions are
Hockey and swimming.
hockey,
Right.
the skiing, Nordic skiing practice, and Bowdoin.
Yeah.
I mean, other than that, everyone takes a bus.
So all right, so for F, we just want to strike,
The sports piece.
but we're back to including sports or not. So parents will be informed whenever private vehicles will be used to transport their children for a field trip or other school purposes that are out of district, period.
Yep. Okay.
Right? And then we delete the rest. And then student safeguards in B picks up the sports, right? For out-of-district extra and co-curricular activities, we're going to strike where transportation is not provided. So it'll say, for out-of-district extra co-curricular activities, parents and students will be required to sign a permission slip prior to the beginning of each season.
Does that fit?
For what? This is my question about the apprenticeship. For what? What are you signing permission for?
For them to go in a private vehicle.
Doesn't say it.
Well, this whole policy is about private vehicles, kids in private vehicles.
Now, there was a case that was also brought that would affect F, and what we strike out of that one. Kids sometimes from the middle school take classes at the high school, and it's very confusing for some of the kids to follow the schedule of the high school and the middle school. So oftentimes they make mistakes and they end up in the wrong school, and they need to be transported from one school to another.
Right.
Those are in district.
Right.
But they still get private transportation, and I would assume that parents want to know if their kids are being transported in private vehicles, even if it is within district. So I would just end F after the word purposes, after school purposes. So that includes both in district and out of district. Just phone call to inform parents.
The board agree with that? Okay. Just period after purposes.
So parents will be informed whenever private vehicles will be used to transport their children for a field trip or other school purposes, period.
Great.
Everybody all right with that?
On C, you have a typo. Employees.
Oh, there's no P.
Right.
Oh, look at that.
And
It's
then
weird, your
in-
brain just
Where'd
puts
that
it
go?
there.
And there's another typo, employee safeguards, under E. You're referring to sticker as plural, but you're saying display a current inspection. Sticker should be singular.
I think it's actually crossed out, the S.
Oh, the S is crossed out.
There's a little line through it. They picked that one up.
Yeah. You see it? Yeah, it's tiny.
I'm sorry.
How's this suggestion for B? For out-of-district extra or co-curricular activities where transportation may or may not be provided, parents and students will be required to sign the permission form.
I thought we were just going to delete. Where transportation is not provided. And that kind of just
Right, then
Yeah,
makes it
whatever
sure.
works easier.
Activities, parents and students will be required to sign a permission form prior to the beginning of the season. So to Kate's point, do we want to say to be transported in private vehicles?
I was going to say, I'm really going to be sticking on this one.
Yeah. So you wanted to say that at the end of the sentence?
I wasn't going to let it go.
So add for transportation and private vehicles.
Right.
Kate? Okay.
So why do we have permission slips signed for some cases and not for others? Is there a liability issue? I mean, why do we even do it?
Why do we have them on any of them?
Right, if we're only doing them in some cases when they're in private vehicles and not in other cases, why do we do it at all?
Well,
Inform the parents.
Well, I just think when it comes to sports, it's probably easier to manage, right, Craig? If you know from the beginning that, yes, they can go in a private vehicle. And the reason we don't do it in the other situations is because we're really only talking about emergency situations where it would be impractical, impossible to get it signed.
Right, I just wonder about is it a liability? Is that why we get them signed?
Well, I'm sure that that's part of it.
So that's what I wonder. Why is that liability not cover? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Well, I think
Throw the whole thing out.
Nobody goes in private vehicles. Get rid of the policy.
For me, the difference is whether or not they're driving themselves within district or out of district. It's like, we don't have a permission form. If I'm a senior and I have a car and I drive down the road and I pick up my friend and we come to school, there's no permission form for that. And it's like, if I'm gonna drive to Hunter Road for practice and I choose to drive and I bring my friend, I mean, that's within the district. But I think once you go beyond the boundaries of our community, now you're involving I-95 and.
Well, that's my question when we talk about field trips and other school purposes. I know that's an emergency situation, but I would think it carries the same liability as somebody driving down 95 for sports.
Well, wait, where exactly are you talking about in here?
I think part of it too is just, you want to feel like when you're allowing kids to do that with sports, that the parents know that, and you don't want to be having to make all those phone calls for every game, right, Craig?
Right.
I mean, that's part of it.
Every day for practice.
It's just way more efficient. What I worry about is that we've had situations this year where we've needed staff to transport students and different things like that. And so that's why we don't want to say in a policy that kids can't be transported without, a written form. Okay.
Naomi, I mean.
I think it's just, I think you're playing, there's
Right.
some sort of statistical numbers. These kids are driving to all the practices, all the games. They're on the road a lot more, right? So we'd rather have those ones covered for the liabilities.
We're just going to take the risk on the others. Okay.
Ideally, you have a signature from all of them, but the practicality of that in situations where F comes into play is like.
So I'm just wondering if the parental notification, and that's the substitute of the signature, like a signed permission slip. So I don't think that you have the liability if you have parental permission. Is the oral?
Yeah, but it's not.
So if I have to leave you a message that says, hey, we have to get your kid.
It's notification, not permission.
Oh, you don't necessarily speak to the parent.
What's implied there?
Well, I would think in 99% of the cases, we're speaking to the parent. And that would, I think what you're saying, that would help with the liability.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm
Well,
wondering, like,
right.
is that what we're saying, is that getting parental consent, whether it's written or verbal, is sufficient to cover us? And so the reason that we don't do that for like sports is because, to your point, the permission slip is much more efficient than calling the parents every time you go to a practice or a game, right?
Right, but we also know anybody can sue for anything, right? So I don't want to lead you to a false sense of security, but I think part of it is just a communication piece too.
Right, and right. Yeah, I don't want you, I don't mean by suggesting that you get oral or written, that you can't be sued, but that we're apparently saying that getting the verbal or the written is equal under the equal protection.
And there may also be an emergency that arises during a sports situation. Say a team has to leave and one of the kids is having a conference with a teacher and is late, can come out, the bus has to go, otherwise everyone will be late, and then somebody transports that kid, make a phone call to the parent. Just use the same as you would for F, right?
That happens probably once or twice a season, where we're playing in Waynfleet and the kid has a doctor's appointment in Portland, and the mom calls and says, hey, my daughter has an appointment in Portland, she's driving down, can she just meet the team there? And I say, yes, that's fine. We're not gonna make them drive, because they can't catch the bus anyway, if they drive back. That happens at least once or twice a season.
So
Yes, so F is as is, except that it stops after the word purposes. The rest of it's deleted. And then B is, we're crossing off where transportation is not provided, and then adding at the end for transportation in private vehicles.
And add
great.
the P to C.
And yes, add P to employees, yes. Okay, excellent, thank you. I have one more, yes. The other one, there was no discussion on last time, and basically the changes were because of the law. So that first paragraph is changed to the second paragraph, and you'll note the legal reference that's crossed off in the new legal reference. That's reflected in the 2 paragraphs changes. And then we crossed off the last sentence.
Now, what is currently the first paragraph? Maddie wasn't on the board yet, but she stood up to suggest that we add to the basis of race, national origin, religion, sex, age, disability, that we also add gender. Is that something
So
that
sex
legally is
that's
required?
included
or?
under, it's law.
Okay.
It's law, yeah.
It actually was sexual orientation, but I do think that that's also included under, somewhere I saw, probably the HR person needs to review that, but I do believe sexual orientation is included in that, but that was my recommendation at the time. Yeah, not gender.